we are going to do a little bit of watching Vidya. Merrick. What the fuck is even here? Twitter is fucked. But that's like normal. Like, Twitter's been fucked. What do we have? What can we watch? It's like an hour long. And decent. An hour long and not straight fucking trash. We can watch some Lex Friedman interviews. Who's he had on recently? Hikaru Nakamura. Why does that name? Gotham Chess is pretty cool. Cool interview there. Will Sasso. Bowtie Sisters, Nick Lane. Noam Chomsky. Peterson. That was 2 months ago. That was like in the peak of his fucking insane phase. Back when he was a monster. Yeah, let's watch that. That sounds fucking dope. Okay. This can be like a smidge louder. We're gonna have it at 0 decibels, and we'll put this at negative. I don't know, something. I'll put it at -5. 5.2 seems fine. Let's watch this JP one and see kind of what happens. See if there's anything. Let's see if there's anything else actually first that really rustles my jimmies that I'm like, yes, I have to watch this. Joe Rogan. I didn't even know this like Friedman guy. Richard Wolff. Bobby Lee's sick. Ooh, Grimes. That one's tempting. We like a little bit of Grimes.
Battle not with monsters, lest ye become a monster. Yeah. And if you gaze into the abyss gazes also into you.
Right. But I would say, bring it on. If you gaze into the abyss long enough, you see the light, not the darkness.
Are you sure about that?
I'm betting my life on it.
The following is a conversation with Jordan Peterson.
Jordan Peterson,
an influential psychologist,
melodramatic
lecturer, podcast host, and author of Maps of Meaning, 12 Rules for Life, and Beyond Order. This is the Lex Friedman Podcast. To support it, please check out our sponsors in the description. And now, dear friends, here's Jordan Peterson. Dostoevsky wrote in The Idiot, spoken through the character of Prince Mishkin, that beauty will save the world. Solzhenitsyn actually mentioned this in his Nobel Prize acceptance speech. What do you think Dostoevsky meant by that? Was he right?
Well,
listening to the mic.
I guess it's the divine that saves the world. Let's say you could say that by definition. And then you might say, well, are there pointers to that which will save the world or that which eternally saves the world? And the answer to that, in all likelihood, is yes. And that's maybe truth and love and justice and the classical virtues, beauty, perhaps in some sense foremost among them. That's a difficult case to make, but definitely a pointer.
Which direction is the arrow pointing?
Well, the arrow is pointing up. And no, I think that which it points to is what beauty points to. It transcends beauty. It's more than beauty.
And that speaks to the divine.
It points to the divine.
Okay, one of the problems with the way Jordan Peterson speaks, especially about like more ethereal topics, like love and justice and like, right, these very like philosophical concepts, is that he sounds so fucking good when he talks about them. Okay, like if you don't pay attention to what he's saying and you just like listen to the words, listen to the like the flowery words, go right past your ear and just let it vibe with you. Just let it vibe with your conscience, your inner soul, which is what 90% of fucking people are gonna do when they just run across this dude on their For You page or on Facebook or on any of that other shit, and he just starts going off and starts giving like really, 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 or like saying really dumb shit in a very compelling way about esoteric topics or ethereal topics that people have a hard time talking about, grasping, understanding, sharing with the people around them already. And then they see one guy who seems like he's got it figured out because he talks very confidently about these things and the language seems right, it feels right. Gosh, he really is a fucking silver-tongued devil.
Yeah, and I would say again, by definition, because we could define the divine in some real sense. So one way of defining the divine is, what is divine to you is your most fundamental axiom. And you might say, well, I don't have a fundamental axiom. And I would say, that's fine, but then you're just confused because you have a bunch of contradictory axioms. And you might say, well, I have no axioms at all. And then I'd say, well, you're just epistemologically ignorant beyond comprehension if you think that. Because that's just not true at all.
So you don't think a human being can exist within contradictions?
Well, yeah, we have to exist within contradiction, but when the contradictions make themselves manifest, say in confusion with regard to direction, then the consequence of that technically is anxiety and frustration and disappointment and all sorts of other negative emotions. But the cardinal negative emotion,
Let's just try. Let's just see.
signifying multiple
Maybe they did a little
pathways
silly
forward,
goofy.
is anxiety. It's an entropy signal.
But you don't
See,
think that
maybe
kind
it
of
was-
entropy signal can be channeled into beauty, into love? Why does beauty and love have to be clear, ordered, simple?
Well, I would say it probably doesn't have to be, it can't be reduced to clarity and simplicity.
And I know that like,
because when it's optimally structured, it's a balance between order and chaos.
Can I
order
pause?
itself. If it's too ordered, if music is too ordered, it's not acceptable. It sounds like a drum machine. It's too repetitive.
oh my, what is happening with my computer? My computer's having a fucking meltdown. It's having an aneurysm. I forgot what I was going to say.
Too predictable. It has to have, well, it has to have some fire in it, along with the structure. I was in Miami doing a seminar on Exodus with a number of scholars, and this is a beauty discussion. When Moses first encounters the burning bush,
Is that better? What the fuck is going on? My computer is acting like it's about to fucking melt. It's not even blowing that hot. OBS is at 83%. If I change... I think I need to change it to a different... But also I forgot to set up Restream. Give me a sec, guys. Well, it's set up, but it's not, I didn't set up titles. Which I kind of need to do that. I don't know what's going on. Can I watch this? Don't I have like a dashboard? What the fuck is going on? It's still taking up like literally 80% CPU usage. This better be the crispiest looking stream on the fucking planet. It's gonna be loud. Give it a sec. I do need to check volumes of the stream too, but... Alright, this is literally untenable. I am gonna have to turn off stream, turn it back on. Okay? So just hang out for like 2 seconds. I have to turn it off, change one setting, and turn it back on. Okay? I'm sorry. Okay, that should be better. Give it a sec. That should be better. Give it a sec. Average duration is an hour. 3.5 hours. How do I get to home? I have no idea how to... Why is this not working? What the fuck is happening? Bro, I don't know what's going on. I need to edit the titles to my videos. Oh, maybe I don't, okay? Okay, I think we figured it out.
Founders the burning bush. It's not a conflagration that demands attention. It's something that catches his attention. It's a phenomenon, and that means to shine forth. And Moses has to stop and attend to it, and he does.
Okay.
And he sees
I've
this
checked one more thing.
fire that doesn't consume the tree. And the tree is a structure, right? It's a tree-like structure. It's a branching structure. It's a hierarchical structure. It's a self-similar structure. It's a fractal structure. And it's the tree of life, and it's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And the fire in it is the transformation that's always occurring within every structure. And the fact that the fire doesn't consume the bush in that representation is an indication of the balance of transformation with structure. And that balance is presented as God. And what attracts Moses to it, in some sense, is the beauty. Now, it's the novelty and all that, but like a painting is like a burning bush. That's a good way of thinking about it, a great painting. It's too much for people often. You know, my house was and will soon be again completely covered with paintings inside. And it was hard on people to come in there because, well, my mother, for example, would say, well, why would you want to live in a museum? And I'd think, well, I would rather live in a museum than anywhere else in some real sense, but beauty is
I want
daunting.
to make sure this is
It
working.
scares people.
Sorry, I know
They're
this is
terrified
riveting.
of buying art, for example, because their taste is on display. And they should be terrified because generally people have terrible taste. Now, that doesn't mean they shouldn't foster it and develop it, but, and you know, when you put your taste on display, it's really exposes you.
Even to yourself as you walk past it.
Oh,
every day.
Absolutely.
This is who I am.
Yeah, well, and look how mundane that is, and look how trite it is, and look at how cliched it is, and look at how sterile
me a
or
minute.
too ordered it is,
I'm
or too
almost done.
chaotic.
Or how quickly you start to take it for granted because you've seen it so many times.
Well, if it's a real
This
piece
is fine.
of art,
It's
that
not the best
doesn't
art in the world, but it's
you
whatever.
notice the little details.
The
We'll
whole
worry
is
about
greater than the sum of the parts.
Getting
I mean,
every
there are
single
images,
little bit of...
religious images in particular, so we could call them deep images, that people have been unpacking
Every little
for
ounce
4,000
of
years and still
optimization
have.
we'll
I'll
deal
give you an
with later.
example.
All right.
This is a terrible example. So I did a lecture series on Genesis, and I got a lot of it unpacked, but by no means all of it. When God kicks Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden, he puts cherubim with flaming swords at the gate to stop human beings from re-entering paradise. I thought, what the hell does that mean, cherubim? And why do they have flaming swords? I don't get that. What is that exactly? And then I found out from
Cap
Matthew
card sound
Pageau,
isn't
who
working
wrote a great
again.
book on symbolism in Genesis, that cherubim are the supporting monsters of God. It's a very complicated idea. And that they're partly a representation of that which is difficult to fit into conceptual systems. They've also got an angelic or demonic aspect. Take your pick. Why do they have flaming swords? Well, a sword is a symbol of judgment and
Let's go.
the separation of the wheat from the chaff. I use a sword to cut away, and to carve. And a flaming sword is not only that which carves, it's that which burns. And what does
True.
it carve away and burn? Well, you want to get into paradise? It carves away everything about you that isn't perfect. And so what does that mean? Okay, well, here's part of what it means. This is a
What?
terrible thing. So you could say that the entire Christian narrative is embedded in that image. Why? Well, let's say
Let's
that
go.
flaming swords are a symbol of death. That seems pretty obvious. Let's say further that they're a symbol of apocalypse and hell. That doesn't seem completely unreasonable. So
Gosh,
here's
he's
an
so
idea.
big.
Not only do you
He's
have
just
to
a
face
big
death,
boy.
you have to face death and hell before you can get to paradise.
He's so
Hellish
edgy.
judgment. And all that's embedded in that image. And a
Oh,
piece of
right.
art with
That
an
was an
image like
accident.
that has all that information in it. And it shines forth in some fundamental sense. It reaches into the back tendrils of your mind at levels you can't even comprehend and grips you. I mean, that's why people go to museums and gaze at paintings they don't understand. And that's why they'll pay, what's the most expensive objects in the world? If it's not carbon fiber racing yachts, it's definitely classic paintings, right? It's high level technological implements, or it's classic art. Well, why are those things so expensive? Why do we build temples to house the images? Even secular people go to museums. I'm secular. Well, are you in a museum? Yes. Are you looking at art? Yes. Well, what makes you think you're secular then?
It's arguable that the thing many, many centuries from now that will remain of all of human civilization will be our art.
Well-
Not even the words.
Well, you know, a book has remained a very long time, right? The biblical
Not
writings.
that long.
No,
a few millennia.
that's right.
But that's in the full arc of living organisms.
Yeah.
Perhaps will not.
Well, we have images we have artistic images that are at least 50,000 years old, right? That have survived. And some of those they're already profound in their symbolism.
By we,
Venus,
do you
Will,
mean
and Dorothy.
humans?
Yeah,
I
we found
really
them.
need to buy
And-
moves
and
for Napoleon.
They've lasted that long. And so, and then
I thought
think about
Napoleon
Europe.
had good moves.
Secular people all over the world make pilgrimages to Europe. Well, why? Because of the beauty. Obviously. I mean, that's self-evident. And it's partly because there are things in Europe that are so beautiful, they take your breath away, right? They make your hair stand on end. They fill you with a sense of awe. And we need to see those things. It's not optional. We need to see those things. The cathedrals. I was in a cathedral in Vienna, and it was terribly beautiful, you know.
Terribly
Well,
beautiful.
it was terribly beautiful.
Is beauty painful for you? Is that the highest form of beauty? It really challenges you?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I got a good analysis of the statue of David. Michelangelo's statue says, you could be far more than you are. That's what that statue
stop.
says. And this
Yeah.
cathedral,
Just
down,
work
we
the
went
way I
down
want
into
you
the,
to work.
into the under structure of it, and there were 3 floors of bones from the plague. And there they all are. And then that cathedral's on top of it. It's no joke to go visit a place like that. No, it rattles you to the core. And our religious systems have become propositionally dubious. But there's no arguing with the architecture, although modern architects like to, with their sterility and their giant middle fingers erected everywhere. But beauty is a terrible pointer to God. And you know, a secular
let's
person
fuck
will
'em
say,
up.
well, I don't believe in God. It's like, have it your way. You cannot move forward into the unforeseen horizon of the future except on faith. And you might say, well, I have no faith. It's like, well, good luck with the future then, because what are you then, nihilistic and hopeless and anxiety ridden? And if not, well, something's guiding you forward. It's faith in something, or
We
multiple
fucked
things,
up
which
its
just makes
animation
you a
really bad.
polytheist, which I wouldn't recommend.
Well, let me ask you one short-lived biological
Poison Ghost,
feedback
right?
to another.
So
Who is
Ghost
God?
would be
That-
the stab
Let's
move.
try to sneak up to this question if it's at all possible. Is
Does
it possible
PLA
to
have
even
stab?
talk about
It
this?
should.
Well, it better be, because otherwise there's no communicating about it, right? It has to be something that can be brought down to earth.
Well, we might be too dumb to bring it down.
It's not just ignorant, it's also sinful,
It's
right?
just not worth it.
So, because there's not knowing, and then
I
there's
don't wanna take the time
wanting
to
to
deal with
know
that
or
bullshit.
refusing to know.
Yeah.
And so you might say, well, could you extract God from a description of the objective world? Right? Is God just the ultimate unity of the natural reality? And I would say, well, in a sense, there's some truth in that, but not exactly, because God, in the highest sense, is the spirit that you must emulate in order to thrive.
Turn around again.
How's that for a biological definition? Spirit is a pattern.
Thank you.
The spirit that you must emulate in order to thrive.
So it's a kind of, in one sense,
Easy.
when we say the human spirit, it's that.
It's an animating principle. Yeah, it's a pattern. And you might say, well, what's the pattern? Okay, well, I can tell you that to some degree. Imagine that, like you're gripped by beauty, you're gripped by admiration. So, and you can just notice this. This isn't propositional. You have to notice it. It's like, oh, turns out I admire that person. So what does that mean? Well, it means I would like to be like him or her. That's what admiration means. It means there's something about the way they are that compels imitation, another instinct, or inspires respect, or awe,
Okay.
even. Okay, what is that
We'll
that grips you?
fight.
Well, I don't know. But let's say, okay, fine, but it grips you, and you want to be like that. Kids hero worship, for example, and so do adults, for that matter, unless they become entirely cynical.
I worship quite a few heroes.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Proudly.
Yes, well,
Yeah.
there you go. And there's no, that worship, that celebration and proclivity to imitate is worship. That's what worship means,
Making
most
my ear
fundamentally.
itch.
Now imagine you took the set of all admirable people and you
They're
extracted
so
out
fast. They
AI
just
learning.
keep running
You
around.
extracted
They never
out the
stop.
central
Oh.
features of what constitutes admirable. And then you did that repeatedly until you purified it to what was most admirable. That's as good as you're going to get in terms of a representation of
Just-
God. And you might say, well, I don't believe in that. It's like, well,
Guys, just
what
be
do you mean?
cool.
Yeah.
it's not a set of propositional facts. It's not a scientific theory about the structure of the objective world. And then I could say something about that too, because I've been thinking about this a lot, especially since talking to Richard Dawkins. It's like, okay, the postmodernist types, going back way before Derrida and Foucault, maybe back to Nietzsche, who I admire greatly, by the way, says God is dead. It's like, okay. But Nietzsche said God is dead and we have killed him and we'll not find enough water to wash away all the blood. So that was Nietzsche. He's no fool.
He's got away with words.
He certainly does. And so then you think, okay, well, we killed the transcendent. Well, what does that mean for science? Well, it frees it up because all that nonsense about a deity is just the idiot superstition that stops the scientific process from moving forward.
Okay, fuck you.
That's basically the new atheist claim, something like that. It's like, wait a second. Do you believe in the transcendent if you're a scientist? And the answer is, well, not only do you believe in it, you believe in it more than anything else, because if you're a scientist, you believe in
Oh,
what
actually.
objects to your theory more than you believe in your theory. Now, we got to think that through very carefully. So your theory describes the world, and as far as you're concerned, your description of the world is the world.
He also really likes
But
to use the
because you're a scientist, you
circular
think,
type
well,
of logic.
even though that's my description of the world and that's what I believe,
Maybe it's not
there's
circular,
something
but like he
beyond
likes
what
to
I
read the
believe.
negative.
and that's the object, and so I'm going to throw my
I don't know if
theory
that makes
against the
sense
object
either.
and see
It
where
should
it
make
breaks.
sense.
And then I'm going to use the evidence of the break as a source of new information to revitalize my theory. So as a scientist, you have to posit the existence of
Yeah,
the
because you're a
ontological
dumb bitch.
transcendent
That's why you got
before you can move forward at all. But more, you have to posit that contact with the ontological transcendent, annoying though it is because it upsets your apple cart, is exactly what will in fact set you free. So then you accept the proposition that there is a transcendent reality, and that that contact with that transcendent reality
Who's giving me the
is
fucking side
redemptive
eye?
in the most fundamental sense. Because if it wasn't, well, why would you bother making contact with it? You're going to make everything worse or better?
Why does the contact with the transcendent set you free as a scientist?
Because you assume, I mean, freedom in the most fundamental sense. It's like, well, freedom from want, freedom from disease, freedom from ignorance, right? That it informs you.
So it's
The logos in it.
of science.
It is definitely that. Yeah, it's the direction. Let's say the directionality of science. That's a narrative direction, not a scientific direction. And then the question is, what is the narrative? Well, it posits a transcendent reality. It posits that the transcendent reality is corrective. It
He's
posits
such a
that our
drama
knowledge structures
queen.
should be regarded with humility. It posits that you should bow down in the face of the transcendent evidence. And you have to take a vow. You know this as a scientist. You have to take a vow to follow that path if you're going to be a real scientist. It's like the truth, no matter what. And that means you posit the truth as a redemptive force. Well, what does redemptive mean? Well, why bother with science? Well, so people don't starve, so people can move about more effectively, so life can be more abundant, right? So it's all ensconced within an underlying ethic. So the reason I was saying that while we were talking about belief in God, it's like, this is a very complicated topic, right? Do you believe in a transcendent reality? So, okay, now let's say you buy the argument I just made on the natural front. You say, yeah, that's just nature. That's not God. And then I'd say, well, what makes you think you know what nature is? Like, see, the problem with that argument is that it already presumes a reductionist, materialist, objective view of what constitutes nature. But if you're a scientist, you're going to think, well, in the final analysis, I don't know what nature is. I certainly don't know its origin or destination point. I don't know its teleology. I'm really ignorant about nature. And so when I say it's nothing but nature, I shouldn't mean it's nothing but what I understand nature to be. So I could say, will we have a fully reductionist account of cognitive process?
He's so big.
And the answer to that
He's
is
bigger
yes,
than
but
an
by the
Obama
time we do
snow.
that, our understanding of matter will have transformed so much that what we think of as reductionist now won't look anything like what we think of reductionism now. Matter isn't dead dust. I don't know what it is. I have no idea what it is. Matter is what matters. There's a definition. That's a very weird definition. But the notion that we have, that if you're a reductionist, a materialist reductionist, that you can reduce the complexity of what is to your assumptions about the nature of matter, that's not a scientific
Your
proposition.
specific limited human assumptions of this century, of this week, in some sense, without
Makes you
God
sit with that one
in
for a
this
minute.
complicated big definition we're talking about, there's no humility, or
There's not enough.
there's less likely to be, or rather science can err in taking a trajectory away from humility
Yeah, get
Well,
shit on.
without something much more powerful than an individual human.
Yeah, well then, and we know, the Frankenstein story comes out of that instantly. And that's a good story for the current times. It's like, you're playing around with making new life? You bloody well better make sure you have your arrows pointed up.
And it's interesting because you said science has
Oh my god, he's such
an
a
ethic to
boomer.
it. I think,
It's embedded in an ethic.
well, there's science is a big word,
Yeah.
and it includes a lot of disciplines that have different traditions.
Oh my gosh, I
biology,
thought you have to
chemistry,
fight all three.
genetics, physics. Those are very different communities, and I think biology, especially when you get closer and closer to medicine and to the human body, does have a very serious. First of all, it has a history with Nazi Germany of being abused and all those kinds of things, but it has a history of taking this stuff seriously. What doesn't have a history of taking this stuff seriously is robotics and artificial intelligence, which is really interesting, because you don't.
True.
You called me a scientist, but
Mhm.
and I would like to wear that label proudly, but often people don't think of computer science as a science. But nevertheless, it will be, I think, the science of one of the major scientific fields of the 21st century, and you
What?
should take that very seriously. Oftentimes when people build
You survived
robots
stab shadow.
or AI
Ooh,
systems,
and
they
you almost
think
got
of
me.
them as
Damn, bitch,
toys
chill.
to tinker with. Oh, isn't this cool?
Mhm. Well,
And
that
I feel this too.
Oh,
isn't
she's
this
got two
cool?
it is
moms.
cool.
But at a certain moment, you might. Isn't this nuclear explosion cool?
Yeah.
Because it is.
Or birth control
Yeah.
cool. It's like, or transistor cool.
Oh, that was
Yeah.
cheating.
Well, the other thing too, and this is a weird problem in some sense, the robotics engineer types, they're thing people, right? I mean, the big classes of interest are interest in things versus
Fuck.
interest in people.
Some of my
That really
best friends
sucks.
are thing people.
Yeah, right. And thing people are very, very clear, logical thinkers, and they're
I think I
very
can actually learn
outcome
Crunch
oriented
now.
and practical. Now, and that's
But I've
all
been
good.
lazy and I haven't updated
That
the
makes
move-
the machinery
the
and
move
keeps it
pool.
functioning. But
Um,
there's a human side of the
yeah,
equation.
strong bite should
and,
finish it.
and you get the extreme thing people, and you think, yeah, well, what about the human here? And when we've been talking about the necessity of having a technological enterprise embedded in an ethic, and you can ignore that, like most of the time, right? You can ignore the overall ethic in some sense when you're toying around with your toys. But when you're building artificial intelligence, it's like, well, that's not a toy. That might be,
Toy becomes the monster very quickly.
yes, and this is a whole new kind of monster. And maybe it's already here.
We're just
Yes, and you notice how
stop
many
being
of those things
fake and
you can
gay
no
and
longer turn off.
lame.
Hey, what is it with
Yeah.
you engineers and your inability to put off switches on
Tell it
things
to
now?
fuck off.
It's like, I have to hold this for 5 seconds for it to shut off. Or I can't figure, I just want to shut it off. Click, off.
Well, what is it with you humans that don't put off switches on other humans? Because there's a magic to the thing that you notice, and it hurts for both you and perhaps one day the thing itself to turn it off.
Mhm.
And so you have to be very careful as an engineer adding off switches to things. I think it's a feature, not a bug, the off switch. The off switch gives a deadline to us humans, to systems of existence. It makes you, death is the thing that really brings clarity to life. And I do think
Yes, hence the flaming swords.
the flaming sword. I do like your view of the flame, the bush, and perhaps the sword. as a thing of transformation. It's also it's a transformation that kind of consumes the thing in the process.
Well, it depends on how much of the thing is chaff. You know, this is why you can't touch the
Let's
Ark of the Covenant,
go.
for example.
Good cutscene.
And this is why
Felina.
people can have
Oh my
very
God.
bad psychedelic trips. It's like
Beat
if you're
them up with my
95% deadwood and you
Your
get
lips
too
are
close
so
to the flame,
weird because you're
the
animated
5%
weird.
that's left might not be able to make it.
So you think it's all chaff, but I think there is some aspect of destruction that's you know the old Bukowski line of do what you love and let it kill you.
Right.
Don't you think that destruction is part of
That's humility.
that's humility? That's
You bet. It's like invite in the judgment. Invite in the judgment because maybe you can die a little bit instead of dying completely.
Yeah.
No, and I think it's Alfred North Whitehead. We can let our ideas die instead of us. Right? We can have these partial personalities that we can burn off and we can let them go before they become tyrannical pharaohs and we lose everything. And so, yeah, there's this optimal bite of death. And who knows what it would mean to optimize that? Like, what if it was possible that if you died enough all the time, that you could continue to live? And the thing is, we already know that biologically, because if you don't die properly
remember
all the
hating
time,
this one.
well, it's cancerous outgrowths and like it's a very fine balance between productivity on the biological front and the culling of that, right? Life is a real balance between growth and death. And so what would happen if you got that balance right? Well, we kind of know, right? Because if you live your life properly, so to speak, and you're humble enough to let your stupidity die before it takes you out, you will live long. That's just a fact. Well, but then what's the ultimate extension of that? And the answer is we don't know. We have no idea.
Well, let me ask you a difficult question because
As opposed to the easy ones that you've been asking so far.
well, Dostoevsky is always just a warm up. So if death every single day is the way to progress through life, you have become quite famous.
Death and hell.
Death and hell.
Yeah, because you don't want to forget the hell part.
Do you worry that your fame traps you into the person that you were before?
Yeah, well,
That
even
it
Elvis
makes-
became an Elvis impersonator by the time he died.
Yeah, do you fear that you have become a Jordan Peterson impersonator? That do you fear of, in some part, becoming the famous suit-wearing, brilliant Jordan Peterson? The certainty in the pursuit of truth, always right.
I think I worry about it more than anything else. I hope I do. I better.
Has fame, to some degree, when you look at yourself in the mirror, in the quiet of your mind, has it corrupted you?
No doubt, in some regard. I mean, it's a very difficult thing to avoid, because things change around you. People are much more likely to do what you ask, for example, right? And so that's a danger, because one of the things that keeps you dying properly is that people
We
push back
may
against you optimally. This is
break,
why so many
do
celebrities
something else.
spiral out of control, especially the tyrannical types that, say, run countries. Everyone around them stops saying, yeah,
My
you're deviating
buddy
a
who I
little bit
usually
there."
play
They laugh at
Fortnite
all the
with
jokes. They open all their doors. They
just had
always
his
want
kids,
something
so
from
probably can't do that.
the
one.
red carpet's always rolled
Let's just
out.
fucking
It's like,
let's just
well,
blast
you
through
think,
this.
wouldn't
We
that
got
be lovely?
like
It's,
2
well,
days.
not if the red carpet is rolled
In an
out to
hour
you
and
while
1
you're on
minute
your way to
or in 11
perdition.
minutes, we've
That's
got
not a
2
good
days.
deal. You just get there
Tell
more
Scarlet
efficiently.
about it to come out. We got
And
2
so one
days
of
to
the
finish
things
this game,
that I've
including
tried to
beating
learn to
Volo.
manage is to have people around me all the time who are critics, who are saying, yeah, I could have done that better, and you're a little too harsh there, and you're alienating people unnecessarily there,
Oh my
and you
gosh,
should have done some more background
I forgot they
work there.
prepared it so fast.
And I think the responsibility attendant upon that increases as your influence increases. And as your influence increases, then that becomes a lot of responsibility. So, and then maybe have an off day. And here's an example. I've been writing some columns lately about things that perturb me, like the forthcoming famine, for example. And it's hard to take those problems on. It's difficult to take those problems on in a serious manner, and it's frightening.
Honestly,
It would be
badass
easier
shit.
to
He
go out
just
to the
like
cottage
walked
with my
through
wife and go out
lava.
on the lake and watch the sunset. And so I'm tempted to draw on anger as a motivating energy to help me overcome the resistance to doing this. But then that makes me more harsh and judgmental in my tone when I'm reading such things, for example, on YouTube, than might be optimal. Now, I've had debates with people about that, because I have friends who say, no, if you're calling out the environmentalist globalists who are harassing the Dutch farmers, then a little anger is just the ticket. But then others say, well, you don't want to be too harsh.
And I'm
because
right
you
in the
alienate
butthole
people
on
who
that
would
one.
otherwise listen to you. So that's a hard balance to get right.
But also maybe anger hardens your mind to where you don't notice the subtle, quiet beauty of the world. The quiet love that's always there, that permeates everything. Sometimes you can become deeply cynical about the world It's the Nietzsche thing.
Yeah.
Battle not with monsters, lest ye become a monster.
Yeah.
And if you gaze into the abyss gazes also into
Oh,
you.
I probably
But I
should
would say,
have.
bring it on. Right? Because
Well,
that's why I also say, knowing that he's absolutely right.
I think we shadow ball.
If you gaze into the abyss,
Oh, it's
long
only
enough,
level
you see the
36?
light, not the darkness.
Are you sure about that?
I'm betting my life on it.
Yeah, it's a heck of a bet.
Well, that's
Because it might distort your mind to where all you see
My weed is
abyss.
not working.
is abyss,
Yeah.
is the
I
evil.
wonder if it
as well.
needs
well.
to
Then
be
I would
plugged
say you
in.
haven't looked long enough.
That's probably what it needs,
No, that's
actually.
back to the
You're just a
the
limited
swords,
human.
the flaming swords. It's like
Give
so.
me
I
a
said the whole
sec.
story of Christ was prefigured in that image. It's like the story of Christ psychologically is radical acceptance of the worst possible tragedy. That's what it means. That's what the crucifix means psychologically. It's like gaze upon that which you are most afraid of. That story doesn't end there,
Right.
because in the story, Christ goes
Oh.
through death into hell. So
That's the
death
wrong
isn't
one.
enough. The abyss of innocent death is not sufficient to produce redemption. It has to be a voluntary journey to hell. And maybe that's true for everyone. And that's like, there is no more terrifying idea than that, by definition. And so then, well, do you gaze upon that? Well, who knows? Who knows?
How often do you gaze upon death, your own? How often do you remind yourself that this ride ends?
Personally,
Personally,
all the time.
because you, as a deep thinker and philosopher, it's easy to start philosophizing and forgetting that you might die
The
today.
angel of death sits
He's
on every
so
word.
fucking edgy, dude.
How's that?
All
how
the
often
time,
do you
everything
actually
always speaks
consciously
about.
All the time.
notice
It's
the
not
angel?
only that
All
he's
the time.
saying crazy shit. It's that
I think it's one of the things that made me peculiar.
it feels like he has
When I was in
to.
graduate school,
He's like that one
I thought
fucking
about-
kid in
I
your
was-
class
I had the thought of death in my mind
who's
all the time.
always like being super.
And I noticed that
fucking
many of the
dramatic.
people that I was with, these were people I admired fine. That
I don't know
wasn't
how to
part of
explain
their
it.
character.
I don't know. It's
It was
boomer
definitely
shit.
part
Okay.
of mine. I'd wake up every morning.
If y'all
It's
ain't
like
had
for
like a
years,
teacher that acts like
Time
this guy,
short.
then
Get at
you're
it.
missing out.
Time short. Get at it. There's
I had
things
a
to
teacher
do.
that acted like this in high school.
And so
and
that
I'm
was always it's
so
still
glad
there.
he didn't
And
get
it's
famous
still there
because
with,
if this
I
is
would
what he
say.
would have acted
And
like.
it's
Holy
unbearable in
shit.
some sense.
Are you afraid of it? Like what's
Afraid
your
of death?
relationship? Yeah.
You know, I was ready to die a year ago. And not casually. I had people I loved, you know. So no, I'm not very worried about me, but I'm very worried about making a mistake.
Yeah.
I heard Elon Musk talk about that a couple of months ago. It was really a striking moment. Someone asked him about death, and he said, just offhand, and then went on with the conversation. He said, that'd be a relief. And then he went on with the conversation.
Oh.
And I thought, well, you know, he's got a lot of weight on his shoulders. I'm sure that part of him thinks
Oh fuck.
it'd be easier just if this wasn't here at all. Now, he said it offhand, but it was a telling moment in my estimation.
So for him, that's a why live question.
Hmm?
The exhaustion of life.
Yeah, yeah.
If you call it life is suffering, but
Yeah.
the hardship.
I'm more afraid of hell than death.
You're afraid of the thing that follows.
I don't know if it follows or if it's always here. I think we're going to
Oh
find
my
out.
gosh.
What's
That's
the
okay.
connection between death and hell?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
Is there
I would've
something
been
that
so
needs
mad
to be
if that
done before you
killed me.
arrive?
You're more likely to die terribly if you live in a manner that brings you to hell. That's one connection.
And terribly is a very deep kind of concept. Okay.
Yeah.
Uh,
And that's a definition, by the way.
what do you make of Elon Musk? You've spoken about him a bit. You met
I'm
him.
struck with admiration. That's what I make
Now
of him.
we'll
And I
go
always
back to
think,
this idea
I
of
always think of
admiration.
that as a primary. Well, it's like, do you find this comedian funny? It's like, well, I laugh at him. You know what I mean? It's not propositional again. And so,
Yeah,
there are things
I
I would like
guess.
to ask Mr. Musk about. The Mars venture. I don't know what he's up to there. It strikes me as absurd in the most fundamental sense, because I think, well, it'd be easier just to build an outpost in the Antarctica or in the desert.
Well, how much of the human endeavor is absurd?
Well, that's what did Nietzsche say? Great men are seldom credited with their stupidity. Who the hell knows what Musk is up to? I mean, obviously he's building rockets. Now he's motivated because he wants to build a platform for life
let's
on
go.
Mars. Is that a good idea? Who am I to say?
Do you
He's building the rockets, man. But I'd like to ask him about it.
I would like to see that conversation. I do think that, having talked to him quite a bit offline, I think several of his ideas, like Mars, like humans becoming a
And then he's not
multiplanetary
gonna be
species,
there.
could be one of the things that
Whoa.
human civilization looks back at as, duh, I can't believe he is one of the few people that was really pushing this idea, because it's the obvious thing for society, for life to survive.
Yeah, well, it isn't obvious to me that I'm in any position to evaluate Elon Musk. like I would like to talk to him and find out what he's up to and why. But I mean, he's an impossible person. What he's done is impossible. All of it. It's like he built an electric car that works. Now, does it work completely, and will it replace gas cars, or should it? I don't know. But if we're going to build electric cars, he seems to be the best at that by a lot. And he more or less did that. People carp about him, but he more or less did that by himself. I know he's very good at distributing responsibility and all of that, but he's the spearhead. And then that was pretty hard. And then he built a rocket
No,
at
why
like
are
one-tenth
we?
the price of NASA rockets. And then he shot his car out into space. That's pretty hard. And then he's building this boring company, more or less as a, what would you call it? It's sort of, it's this whimsical joke in some sense, but it's not a joke.
No, it's literally a joke. It's
And
just a
you're
joke.
like
The Boring
delving
Company
into
is a big
the,
fucking
the
joke.
depths of the mind.
Don't listen to the
Starlink,
Boring
it's like,
Company.
Go
It's a
Elon,
lie.
as far as I'm concerned. And then, he puts his finger on things so oddly. The problem is underpopulation. It's like, I think so too. I think it's a terrible problem that the West, for example, is no longer at replacement.
Why
with
are
regard
Lex
to birth rate. It means
Friedman
we've
and Jordan
abandoned the
Peterson
virgin and the
talking
child
about
in the most
Elon
fundamental
Musk?
sense. It's a
What
bloody
the fuck
catastrophe.
do they have to
And Musk,
say about
he
Elon
sees it
Musk of
clear as can
anything
be.
of value? Lex, I
And where
understand a
everyone
little
else
bit
is
more.
running around going,
He's an
"Oh, there's
interviewer.
too many
His
people."
job is literally to talk
Nope.
to people.
Got that. Not only, see, I've learned that there are falsehoods and lies, and
Why-
there are anti-truths.
Why the fuck
And
is
an
he asking
anti-truth
Jordan
is
Peterson
something
about
that's
him?
so preposterous that you couldn't make a claim that's more opposite to the truth. And the claim that there are too many people on the planet is an anti-truth. So, people say, well, you have to accept limits to growth and et cetera. It's like, I have to accept the limits that you're going to impose on me because you're frightened of the future. That's your theory, is it? Okay.
Well, it's an idea. It could be a right idea. It could be a wrong idea. I think anti-truth.
Here, I'll tell you why it's the wrong idea, I think. So imagine that there's an emergency.
Yeah, you are a dumb loser.
There's a dragon. Someone
Good
comes and
job.
says, "There's
I'm
a
glad you
dragon.
figured it
I'm
out.
the guy to deal with it." That's what the environmentalists say, the radical types who push limits to growth. Then I look at them and I think, okay, is that dragon real or not? That's one question. Well,
I ask
is
that
the-
question of myself every time
is
when I
the-
spend time alone.
Is the apocalypse looming on the environmental front? Yes or no? I'll just leave that aside for the time being. I think you can make a case both ways for a bunch of different reasons. And it's not a trivial concern. And we've overfished the oceans terribly. And there are environmental issues that are looming large.
Let's
Whether
go.
climate change is the cardinal one or not is a whole different question. We won't get into that. That's not the issue. You're clamoring about a dragon. Okay. Why should I listen to you? Well, let's see how you're reacting to the dragon. First of all, you're scared stiff and in a state of panic.
That's annoying. Okay.
That might indicate you're not the man for the job. Second, you're willing to use compulsion to harness other people to fight the dragon for you. So now not only are you terrified, you're a terrified tyrant. So then I would say, well, then you're not the Moses that we need to lead us out of this particular exodus. And maybe that's a neurological explanation. It's like, if you're so afraid of what
Let's
you're
run around
facing,
and grab
that
these
you're
side
terrified into
quests real quick.
paralysis and nihilism, and that you're willing
And
to
then we'll
use
go back
tyrannical
through at the end of
compulsion
the
to keep
game
your way,
and finish them.
you are
I
not the
just
right
really
leader
wanna-
for the time. So then I like someone like Bjorn Lomborg or Matt Ridley or Marion Tupy. And they say, well, look, we've got our environmental problems. And maybe you could make a case that there's a Malthusian element in some situations. But fundamentally, the track record of the human race is that we learn very fast and faster all the time to do more with less. And we've got this. And I think, yes, to that idea. And I think about it in a fundamental way. It's like, I trust Lomborg, trust Tupy, trust Matt Ridley. They've thought about these things deeply. They're not just saying, oh, the environment doesn't matter, whatever the environment is. The environment, I don't even know what that is. That's everything, the environment. I'm concerned about the environment. It's like, how is that different than saying I'm worried about everything? How are those statements
What?
different semantically?
Well, yeah, the environment, it could be, I'm worried about human society. A lot of these complex systems are difficult to talk about because there's so much involved, for sure.
Yeah, everything. And then these models.
Lex, I need you to
because
push
people have
back
gone
more
after
on
me
this.
because I don't buy the climate models. Well, I think about the climate models as extended into the economic models, because the climate model is, well, there's going to be a certain degree of heating, let's say by 2100. It's like, okay. Some
It's
of that
really
might be
interesting that when you start
human-generated,
talking
some of
about
it's
things like
consequence of warming
climate
after
change,
the Ice Age.
which
This
is
has
for
happened
all intents
before, but
and purposes settled science, as soon as we start talking about things like climate change, suddenly they have their own fancy way of thinking about these things and their own ways of parsing through the data and their own, right? Like, I don't know. It's just fucking insane. And then ooh, man, it's super frustrating.
Fair enough. Let's take your presumption, although there are multiple presumptions, and any error in your model multiplies as time extends. But to have it your way, okay, now we're going to extend the climate model, so to speak, into the economic model. So I just did an analysis of a paper by Deloitte, third biggest company in the US, 300,000 employees, major league consultants. They just produced a report in May. I wrote an article for it in the Telegraph, which I'm going to release this week on my YouTube channel. Said, well, if we get the climate problem under control, economically, because that's where the models are now being generated on the economic front. So now we have to model the environment.
Stop.
And we have to model the economy.
Thank you.
And then we have to model their joint interaction. And then we have to predict 100 years into the future. And then we have to put a dollar value on that. And then we have to claim that we can do that, which we can't. And then this is our conclusion. We're going to go through a difficult period of privation, because if we don't accept limits to growth, there's going to be a catastrophe 50 years in the future or thereabouts. And so to avert that catastrophe, we are going to make people poorer now. How much poorer? Well, not a lot compared to how much richer they're going to be, but definitely, and they say this in their own models, definitely poorer than they would be if we just left them the hell alone. And so then I think, okay, poorer, eh? Who? Well, let's look at it biologically. We've got a hierarchy, right, of stability and security. That's a hierarchy, or one type. You stress a hierarchy like that, a social hierarchy. So there's birds in an environment, and an avian flu comes in. And then you look at the birds in the social hierarchy, and the low-ranking birds have the worst nests. So they're most exposed to wind and rain and sun, and farthest from food supplies, and most exposed to predators. And so those birds are stressed, which is what happens to you at the bottom of a hierarchy. You're more stressed because your life is more uncertain. You're more stressed. Your immunological function is compromised because of that. You're sacrificing the future for the present. An avian flu comes in, and the birds die from the bottom up. That happens in every epidemic. You die from the bottom up. Okay, so they say when the aristocracy catches a cold, the working class dies of pneumonia. All right, so now we're going to make people poorer. Okay, who? Well, we know who we make poor when we make people poorer. We make those who are barely hanging on poorer. And what does that mean? It means they die. And so what the Deloitte consultants are basically saying is, well, you know, it's kind of unfortunate, but according to our models, a lot of poor people are going to have to die so that a lot more poor people don't die in the future. It's like, okay, hold on a sec. Which of those two things am I supposed to regard with certainty? The hypothetical poor people that you're going to hypothetically save 100 years from now, or the actual poor people that you are actually going to kill in the next 10 years? Well, I'm going to cast my lot with the actual poor people that you're actually going to kill. And so, and then I think further, it's like, well, okay,
the correct framing. I would need to.
Have you actually modeled the world, or is this a big advertising shtick?
This is a very interesting way to frame
demonstration
this
that you're
whole
so intelligent
thing,
that you can actually model the entire
and it's
ecosystem
probably
of the world,
wildly wrong,
including the economic system, and predict it 100 years forward. And isn't there a bit of a moral hazard in making a claim like that? Just a trifle, especially when. So I talked to Bjorn Lomborg and Michael Jan last week. I accepted the UN
and I'm certain there are much
of
more
starvation
solid
this coming year. 150
sources
million
on the internet
will suffer food insecurity. Food insecurity. Yeah, food insecurity. That's the bloody buzzword. Famine. Well, Michael Jan thought 1.2 billion, and then that it'll spiral, because he said what happens in a famine is that the governments go nuts, crazy. The governments destabilize, and then they appropriate the food from the farmers. Then the farmers don't have any money. Then they can't grow crops. And I think, yeah, that's exactly what they do. That's exactly what would happen. And so Jan told me 1.2 billion, and then Bjorn Lomborg said the same thing. I didn't even ask him. He just made it as an offhand comment. So
let me ask you about the famine of the 30s.
Yeah.
Do you think
Ukraine?
In the Ukraine.
What?
Oh, yeah. Fun.
Similar, a lot of the things you mentioned in the last few sentences kind of echo to that part of human history.
The hole in the door.
Do you
No one
You
knows
could take
about.
fall damage like that?
Well,
You could take that much
now
fall
I've
damage?
just spent 4 weeks in Ukraine.
Oh, yeah.
There's different
Oh,
parts of the world
God.
that still, even if they don't know, they know.
Yeah,
They
right.
feel history runs in the blood.
The Dutch knew, in some sense. They had a famine at the end of World War II, and part of the reason the Dutch farmers are so unbelievably efficient and productive is that the Dutch swore at the end of World War II that that was not going to happen again. And then they had to scrape land out of the ocean, because Holland, that's quite a country. It shouldn't even exist. The fact that it's the world's number 2 exporter, you know that it's the world's number 2 exporter of agricultural products. Holland. It's like, I don't think it's as big as Massachusetts. It's this little tiny place. It shouldn't even exist. And they want to put, here's the plan. Let's put 30% of the farmers out of business. Well, the broader ecosystem of agricultural production in Holland is 6% of their GDP. Now, these centralizing politicians think, tell me if I'm stupid about this. Take an industry. You knock it back by fiat by 30%. Now, it runs on like a 3% profit margin. Now, you're going to kill 30% of it. How are you not going to bring the whole thing down, the whole farming ecosystem down? How are you not going to impoverish the transport systems? How are you not going to demolish the grocery stores? You can't take something like that and pare it back by fiat by 30% and not kill it. I can't see how you can do that. I mean, look what we did with the COVID lockdowns. We broke the supply chains. You tried buying something lately? You can't, and wait, and aren't the Chinese threatening Taiwan at the moment? What are we going to do without chips? So, I don't know what these people are thinking. And then I think, okay, what are they thinking? Well, the Deloitte people are thinking, aren't we smart? And shouldn't we be hired by our corporate employers? It's like, okay, too bad about the poor. What are the environmentalists thinking? We love the planet. It's like, do you? We love the poor. Do you? Okay, let's pit the planet against the poor. Who wins? The planet. Okay, you don't love the poor that much. Do you love the planet? Or do you hate capitalism? Let's pit those two things against each other. Oh, well, it turns out we actually hate capitalism. How can we tell? Because you're willing to break it. And do you know what's going to happen? So what's going to happen in Sri Lanka with these 20 million people who now have nothing to eat? Are they going to eat all the animals? Are they going to burn all the firewood? They're stockpiling firewood in Germany.
Oh wait,
So is your environmental globalist utopia going to kill the poor and destroy the planet? And that's okay because we'll wipe out capitalism. So, okay.
Yeah, the dragon and the fear of the dragon drives ideologies, some of which can build a better world, some of which can destroy that world.
Now, what do you think of that theory about trustworthiness? If the dragon that you're facing turns you into a terrified tyrant, you're not the man for the job. Is that a good theory?
It's an interesting theory. Let me use that theory to challenge, because what does terror look like? Let me turn the tables on you. You are terrified, afraid, concerned about the dragon of something we can call communism, Marxism.
Am I terrified of it?
Well,
terrified enough to be a tyrant.
Your theories had two components.
Yeah.
But
I'm not paralyzed.
It had a dragon.
Yeah, I'm not paralyzed, and I don't want to be a tyrant.
The tyrant part, I think, is missing with you.
So
But you are very concerned. The intensity of your feeling does not give much space, actually, at least in your public persona,
Let's go
for sitting quietly with the
now I just
dragon
need to kill
and
a bunch
sipping in
more.
a couple of beers and thinking about this thing. The intensity of your anger, concern about certain things you're seeing in society, is that going to drive you off the path that ultimately takes us to a better world?
That's a good question. I mean, I'm trying to get that right. So we've kind of come to a cultural conclusion about the Nazis. Do you get to be angry about the Nazis? Seems the answer to that is yes.
Well, actually, let me push back here. I also don't trust people who are angry about the Nazis. Because,
I mean the actual Nazis.
well, there's a lot, as you know, there's a lot of people in the world that use actual Nazis to mean a lot of things.
I know.
One of them is very important to me.
Me, for example.
Well, yes.
He's a Nazi,
I think-
or magical super Nazi, as it turns out.
I think they actually sort of steelman all their perspectives. I think a lot of people that call you a Nazi mean it. So
Yeah, I'm
like
aware of that.
there's an important thing there though, because I went to the front in Ukraine,
Yeah.
and a lot of the people that lost their home or their kind of that got to interact a lot with Russian soldiers, Ukrainian people that interacted with the Russian soldiers, they reported that the Russian soldiers really believe they're saving the people of Ukraine in these local villages from the Nazis.
I understand, yeah.
So to them, it's not just that the Ukrainian government has, or Ukraine has some Nazis. It's like it has been. The idea is that the Nazis have taken over Ukraine, and we need to free them.
No.
This is
no,
the belief.
No.
Yeah.
So this, again,
Oh,
Nazi is
can I
still
go
a
up this side the
dragon
whole
that
time?
lives.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's used by people because it's safe to sit next to that dragon and spread any kind of ideology you want. So I just want to kind of say that we have agreed on this particular dragon, but I still don't trust anybody who uses that.
Yeah, but we have issues with boundaries, right? No, it's... So this is a very complicated problem, right? So René Girard believed that
I'm not going to be able to get up there.
it was a human proclivity to demonize the scapegoat and then drive it out of the village. And I've thought about that a lot. We need a place to put Satan. Like, seriously, this is a serious issue.
Should he be inside the village or outside?
Well, maybe he should be inside you. Right? That's the fundamental essence of the Christian
Bow punch,
doctrine.
strong style
like-
move.
Satan is best fought on the
That'll put me
battleground
at
of
6,
your
and then
soul.
if I use 2 strong style moves, I should be
And
at 10.
that's right. That's right.
Can you actually put words to the kind of dragon that you're fighting? Is it communism?
It's the spirit of Cain.
It's the
Can
spirit
you
of Cain.
elaborate
Well,
what the spirit of Cain is?
Yeah, fucking laugh at
So,
him. Good. He deserves
after
it.
Adam and
He's
Eve
a
are
fucking idiot.
thrown out of paradise for
He's
becoming
edgy as shit.
self-conscious, or when they
Make him
become
explain
self-conscious,
himself.
they're
But make
destined
fun
to
of him
work.
for making you
And the
make him
reason for
explain
that,
himself
as far
in
as
the
I can
first
tell,
place.
is that to become self-conscious is to become aware of the future. It's to become aware of death. That certainly happens in the Adam and Eve story.
Is it
To have the scales
communism?
fall from your eyes.
Is your mission in life
And
to
then
destroy
the
communism?
consequence of that is that you now
You
have
just
to
won't
labor
fucking say yes.
to prevent the catastrophes of the future. That's work. Work is sacrifice. Sacrifice of the present to the future. It's delay of gratification. It's maturity. It's sacrifice to something as well, and in the spirit of something. Okay, so now Adam and Eve have
Well-
2 children, Cain and Abel. So those are the first 2 people in history, because the Garden of Eden doesn't count. And they're the first 2 people who are born rather than created. So they're the first 2 people. And that's a hell of a story, because it's a story of fratricidal murder that degenerates into genocide, flood, and tyranny. So that's fun for the opening salvo of the story, let's say. And Abel and Cain both make sacrifices. And for some reason, Abel's sacrifices please God. It's not exactly clear why.
Actually,
And
we're
Cain's
done.
don't.
We're actually done.
Now, there's an implication in the text
What
that
is
it's
the
because
reward?
Cain's sacrifices are true or second rate. God says that Abel brings the finest to the sacrificial
Useless.
altar. He doesn't say that about Cain. So
Nugget
you can
is
imagine that Cain is sacrificing
useful.
away, but he's holding something in reserve. He's not all in. He's not bringing his best to the table.
Choice.
He's not offering his best to God. And so Abel thrives like mad. And
Right.
everyone loves him. And he gets exactly what he needs and wants, exactly when he needs and wants it. He's favored of God. And Cain is bearing this terrible burden forward and working. And his sacrifices are rejected.
Let's go.
So he gets resentful. Really resentful. Resentful enough to call God out and say something like, "This is quite the creation you've got going here.
Hey, yo, dude, you
I'm
suck.
breaking myself in half and nothing good's coming
That's
my
what
way.
he said.
What the hell's up with that?" And then there's
Hey,
Abel,
yo,
the sun's
God,
shining on him every day.
Suck my dick.
How dare you? Okay. But this is God that Cain's talking to. And so God says what Cain least wants to hear, which is what God usually says to people. He says, "Look to your own devices. You're not making the sacrifices you should. And you know it." And then he says something even worse. He says, "Sin crouches at your door like a sexually aroused predatory animal. And you've invited it in to have your way, to have its way with you." And so he basically says, you have allowed your resentment to preoccupy yourself, and now you're brooding upon it and generating something creative, new, and awful, possessed by the spirit of resentment. And that's why you're in the miserable state you're in. So then Cain leaves. His countenance falls, as you might expect. And Cain leaves, and he's so incensed by this because God has said, "Look, your problems are of your own making. And not only that, you invited them in. And not only that, you engaged in this creatively. And not only that,
Yes.
you're blaming it on me.
I have
And
it.
not only that, that's making you jealous of Abel, who's your actual idol and goal." And Cain, instead of changing,
Oh,
kills Abel.
do I just need to
Right.
finish the...
And then Cain's descendants are the first people who make weapons of war. And so that's,
Yes.
okay, you want to know what I think?
Fuck.
That's the eternal story of
It just gives
mankind.
me experience candy.
And it's playing out right now.
And there's Nugget Ball here.
Except at 1,000
Nugget.
times the rate.
Here.
Can I present to you a difficult truth? Perhaps not a truth, but a thought I have, that it is not always easy to know which among us are the Cain.
That's for sure.
And resentment, it is possible to imagine you
I don't
as
know
the
what the
person
professor said, but I
who
assume
has
it
a
had something to
resentment
do.
towards a particular
What's wrong?
worldview
Why are you
that you
frowning?
really worry about.
Yeah, well, I talked to a good friend of mine last week about that publicly. Well, we'll release it. So I said, well, do I have a particular animus against the left, let's say? It's like, well, probably. Okay, why? Well, first of all, I'm a university professor. It's not like the universities are threatened by the right. They're threatened by the left. 100%. And they're not just threatened a little bit. They're threatened a lot. And that threat made it impossible for me to continue in my profession the way I was. And it cost me my clinical practice, too. And that's not over yet, because I
Soft
have
roots,
10
springy
lawsuits
mushroom,
against me right now
huckleberry.
from the
I
College of
think I have
Psychologists,
those.
because they've allowed anyone to
Soft
complain
roots,
about me
springy mushroom,
anywhere in the
huckleberry.
world for any reason, and have the choice to follow that up with an investigation, which is a punishment in and of itself, and are doing so. And then I've been tortured nearly to death multiple times by bad actors on the left. Now, I've had my fair share of radical right-wingers being unhappy with what I've said, but personally, it's been the left the whole time.
Oh, I don't have one.
Not only me, but my family put my family at risk in a big way, and constantly,
have a
like not
mushroom
once or
either.
twice, because many people get canceled once or twice, but I've been canceled like 40 times, and I know like 200 people now who've been canceled, and I can tell you without doubt that it is one of the worst experiences of their life, and that's if it only happens once. And so, and then I also know that
Oh.
the communists killed 100 million people in the 20th century, that the intellectuals excused them for it nonstop and still
Aw.
haven't quit, that almost no one knows about it, and that the specter of resentful Marxism is back in full force. And so do I have a bit of an animus against that?
Resentful Marxism.
Yes. Does it go too far? I don't know. I'm trying to figure that out.
The story you just told, seems nearly impossible for you,
The
an
way he
intellectual
talks
powerhouse,
about
not to
this
have a
shit.
tremendous amount of resentment.
Well,
And this is so let me challenge you.
yeah,
Let me challenge
go
you.
right ahead,
Let me
man.
challenge you. Can you steel man the case that the Prime Minister of this country, Trudeau, wants the best for this country
Oh.
and actually might do good things for this country as an
Okay.
intellectual challenge?
Sure. He seems to get along well with his wife. He has some kids. There's no sexual scandals. And he's in a position where that could easily be the case. He seems to have done some good things on the oceanic management front. He's put a fair bit of Canada's oceans into marine protected areas, and that might be his most fundamental legacy, if it's real. I've been trying to get information about the actual reality of the protection, and I haven't been able to do that. But that's a good thing.
So sorry, the family thing is there's some
Speaks
aspect
to his
of
character.
his character. There is some aspect of him that makes him a good man.
Well,
in that sense.
I mean, there's the evidence there, you know. I mean, he's not a Jeffrey Epstein profligate on the sexual front, so that's something. And his wife, they seem to have a real marriage, and he has kids, so, you know, good for him.
that's a good start, by the way, for a leader.
Yeah, right.
To be a good
right.
man.
Well, then I also thought, okay, well, after the Liberals had brought in a Harvard intellectual who was a Canadian to be their last leader, he didn't work out. And then they're flailing about for a leader. And the Liberals in Canada are pretty good at maintaining power and leadership and have been the dominant governing party in Canada for a long time. And so they went to Justin and said, well, you know, it's you or a conservative. And you can imagine that's not a positive specter for someone who's on the left, or even a liberal, especially, and Trudeau's quite a bit on the left. And they said, we need you to run. And then I thought, okay, well, the answer to that should have been no, because Justin has no training for this, no experience. He was a part-time drama teacher fundamentally. He hadn't run a business. He just didn't know enough to be prime minister. But then I'm trying to put myself in his position, so it's like, okay, I don't know enough, but I'm young, and we don't want the Conservatives, and they had a run, a 10-year run, so maybe it was time for a new government. Maybe I could grow into this man. Maybe I could surround myself with good people, and I could learn humbly, and I could become the person I'm now pretending to be, which we all have to do as we move forward, right? And so then I thought, okay, I think you made a mistake there because you ran only on your father's name. You didn't have the background, but let's give the devil his due and say that's no problem. Okay, so now what do? Well, you get elected, and your first act is to make the cabinet 50% women, despite the fact that only 25% of the elected members are female. It's like, okay, you just halved your talent pool. That was a really bad move for your first move.
Can I ask you about that?
Yeah.
Do you think, where does that move come from? Deep somewhere in the heart, or
No.
is it trying to listen to the social forces of the moment and try to ride those ways
You don't
towards
make a
maybe
decision
greater
like that by
popularity?
after thinking it through. It's like, no, you just halved your talent pool for cabinet positions. That's what you did. There's enough cabinet positions. You know, you could argue that each of them met threshold. It's like, there's a big difference between threshold and excellent.
So you don't think that came from a place of compassion?
I don't
Deep
care if
human
it did. I don't regard compassion as a virtue. Compassion is a reflex, not a virtue.
You don't think?
Judicious compassion is a virtue.
Wait a minute. Compassion can come deep from the human heart and the human mind, I think. Are we talking about the same kind of compassion?
Yes.
Trying to understand the suffering.
Treating
of the world?
adults like infants is not virtuous.
I see, but well, compassion isn't treating adults like I mean, those are just terms.
Are you sure?
Whatever the term is, maybe
Eatable,
love is maybe
eatable
the better
compassion is.
word. I mean, I suppose I'm speaking to love. You don't think those ideas came from
Love is
concern?
compassion.
You don't think
Love
those,
is a blend of compassion and encouragement and truth. Love's
And truth.
complicated, man.
Yeah, it
if
has
I
a lot
love
of good
you,
things in it,
if
yes.
I love you, is it compassion or encouragement you want from me?
Yeah, the dance. Love is definitely a dance of two humans. Ultimately, that leads to the growth of both.
Well,
yes.
that's the thing. The growth element is crucial, because the growth element, to foster the growth element, that requires judgment, compassion, and judgment. Well, even, and have been conceptualized this way forever. Two hands of God, mercy and justice. They have to operate in tandem, right? And mercy is, flawed as you are, you're acceptable. It's like, well, do you want that? Do you want your flaws to be acceptable? And the answer to that is no. It's like, well, that's where the judgment comes in. It's like, but you could be better. You could be more than you are. And that's the maternal and the paternal in some fundamental sense. And there has to be an active exchange of information between those two poles. So even if Trudeau was motivated by compassion, and it's like, yeah, just how loving are you, first of all? No, it was a really bad decision. And then he's expressed contempt for monetary policy. I'm not interested in monetary policies. Okay, but you're prime minister. And he's expressed admiration for the Chinese Communist Party because they can be very efficient in their pursuit of environmental goals. It's like, oh yeah, efficiency, eh? The efficiency of the tyranny in the service of your terror. And I've watched him repeatedly, and I've listened to him a lot, and I've tried to do that clinically and with some degree of dispassion. And that's hard too, because his father, Pierre, devastated the West in 1982 with the national energy policy. And Trudeau is doing exactly the same thing again. And so as a Westerner as well, I have an inbuilt animus, and one that's well deserved, because Central Canada, especially the glittery, literati elite types in the Ottawa, Montreal, Toronto triangle, have exploited the West and expressed contempt for the West far too much for far too long. And that's accelerating at the moment, for example, with Trudeau's recent attack on the Canadian farmers. He's an enemy of the oil and gas industry. It's an utter and absolute bloody catastrophe. And look what's happened in Europe, at least in partial consequence. And he's no friend to the farmers. So I've tried to steelman him, you know. I try to put myself in the position of the people that I'm criticizing. I think he's a narcissist.
Do you think there's a degree to which power changed him?
If you're not suited for the position, if you're not the man for the position, you can be absolutely 100% sure that the power will corrupt you. How could it not? I mean, at the least, if you don't have the chops for the job, you have to devalue the job to the point where you can feel comfortable inhabiting it. So, yes, I think that it's corrupted him. And I mean, look at him doubling down. We wear masks in flights into Canada. We have to fill out an ArriveCAN bureaucratic form on our phones because a passport isn't good enough. We can't get a passport. What if you're 85 and you don't know how to use a smartphone? Oh, well, too bad for you. It's like, yes, it's corrupted him.
Would you talk to him? Well, if you were to sit down and talk with him and he wanted to talk, would you, and what kind of things would you talk about, perhaps on your podcast?
I don't think I've ever said no to talking to anyone. So, which is, you know...
Would you, would that be a first, or would you make that conversation? Do you believe in the power of
No, I'd
conversation
ask
in
him.
those kinds of contexts?
No, if he was willing to talk to me, I'd talk, because I'd like to ask him. I have lots of things I'd like to ask him about. I mean, I've had political types in Canada on my podcast and tried to ask them questions. So I'd like to know.
Is there
You know,
something...
maybe I've got a big part of him wrong.
Yes.
And I probably do. But my observation has been that every chance he had to retreat from his pharaonic position, let's say, he doubled down. And our parliament is not running for the next year. It's still Zoom in. It's still COVID lockdown parliament. For the next year, it's already been fatally compromised, perhaps, by the lockdowns for the last couple of years.
Why? Why does he do that?
This is parliament we're talking about.
He makes such a strong claim. He's like, our Congress is fatally compromised. Then he goes, perhaps. It reminds me of the fucking the essay that one kid wrote about Mario. And he puts, oh fuck, I don't even remember, but at the end of like a couple of sentences he'll just end it with like this one fucking word that sounds very official, but it's obvious, it's padding. Perhaps, I think it was like mayhaps or something like that. Good ass meme, but that's what it reminds me of when he does shit like that.
There's a kind of paralysis, fear-driven paralysis that also, in part, some of the most brilliant people I know are lost in this paralysis. I don't think people have signed a word to it, but it's almost like a fear of this unknown thing that lurks in the shadows, and that unfortunately, that fear is leveraged by people that who aren't in academic circles, who aren't faculty or students and so on, or more in administration, and they start to use that fear, which makes me quite uncomfortable. It does lend people in the positions of power who are not good at handling that power to become slowly, day by day, a little bit more corrupt.
I was really trying to figure out, the last 2 weeks, thinking this through. It's like, how do you know? Let's say someone asked me a question in the YouTube comment. Said, "Well, why can I trust your advice on the environmental front?" And I thought, that's a really good question. Okay, let's see if we can figure out the principles by which the advice would be trustworthy. Okay, how do you know it's not trustworthy? Well, one potential response to that would be the claims are not in accordance with the facts. But, facts are tricky things, and it depends on where you look for them. So that's a tough one to get right because, for example, Lomborg's fundamental critics argue about his facts, not just his interpretation of them. So that can't be an unerring guide. And so I thought, well, the facts exactly doesn't work because when it's about everything, there's too many facts. So then how do you determine if someone's a trustworthy guide in the face of the apocalyptic unknown? Because that's really the question. And the answer is,
no worries.
They're not terrified tyrants. I think that's the answer.
He's still spouting bullshit.
Now, maybe that's wrong. If someone has a better answer,
how do you know if they're a terrified tyrant?
Because they're willing to use compulsion on other people when they could use goodwill. Like the farmers in Canada objected. They said, look, we have every economic reason to use as little fertilizer as we can because it's expensive. We have satellite maps of where we put the fertilizer. We have cut our fertilizer use so substantially in the last 4 years, you can't believe it, and we grow way more food. We're already breaking ourselves in half. And if you know farmers, especially the ones who still survive, you think those people don't know what they're doing. It's like, they're pretty damn sophisticated, man. Like, way more sophisticated than our prime minister. And now you tell them, no, it's a 30% reduction, and we don't care how much food you're growing. So it's not a reduction that's dependent on amount of food produced per unit of fertilizer used, which would be, at least, you can imagine it. So, okay, so you're producing this much food, and you use this much fertilizer, so you're hyper efficient. Maybe we take the 10% of farmers who are the least efficient in that metric, and we say to them, you have to get as efficient as the average farmer. And then they say, well, look, our situation's different. We're in a more northern climate. The soil's weaker. You obviously have to bargain with that, but at least you reward them for their productivity. Well, it's like, well, Holland isn't going to have beef. Well, where are they going to get it? Well, you don't need it. It's like, oh, I see. You get to tell me what I can eat now, do you? Really? Okay. And Holland is going to import food from where? That's more efficient on the fertilizer front.
Oh, this is the first time in the story you meet that guy.
And same with Canada. And isn't this going to make food prices more expensive? And doesn't that mean that hungry people die? Because that is what it means. So
ultimately, poor people pay the price of these kinds of policies.
Not ultimately. Now. Today. That's a crucial distinction because they say, well, ultimately the poor will benefit. Yeah, except the dead ones.
Yes,
Today, right.
It seems like the story of war, too, is a time when the poor people suffer from the decision made by the powerful, the rich, the political elite. Yeah. Let me ask you about the war in Ukraine.
Oh, yeah. We got into plenty of trouble about that, too.
You're just a man in a suit talking on microphones and writing brilliant articles. There's also people dying, fighting. It's their land, it's their country, it's their history. This is true for both Russia and Ukraine.
Yep.
It's people trying to ask. They have many dragons, and they're asking themselves a question: who are we? What is this? What is the future of this nation? We thought
I hate this character
we are a
design
great
so
nation.
fucking much.
And I think both countries say this.
I absolutely
and they
fucking
say,
hate it.
well, how do we become the great nation we thought we are?
Yeah.
And so what? First of all, you got in trouble. What's the dynamics of the trouble? And is
Well,
it
it wasn't
something you
that
regret
much.
saying?
No. I thought about it a lot. I laid out 4 reasons for the war, and then I was criticized in the Atlantic for the argument was reduced to one reason, which was a caricature of the reason. I gave a variety of reasons why the war happened. Mismanagement on the part of the West in relationship to Russia and foreign policy since the wall fell. It's understandable because it's extremely complex. Hyper reliance on Russia as a cardinal source of energy provision for Europe in the wake of idiot environmental globalist utopianism. The expansionist tendencies of Russia that are analogous in some sense to the Soviet Union empire building. And then the last one, which is the one I got in trouble for, which is Putin's belief or willingness to manipulate his people into believing that Russia is a salvific force in the face of idiot Western wokeism. And that's the one I got in trouble for. It's like, well, you're justifying Putin. It's like, it's not only the Russians that think the West has lost its mind. Eastern Europeans think so too. And do I know that? It's like, well, I went to 15 Eastern European countries this spring, and I talked to 300 political and cultural leaders, and you might say, well, they were all conservatives. It's like, actually, no, they weren't. Most of them were conservatives, because it turns out that they're more willing to talk to me, but a good chunk of them were liberals by any stretch of the imagination, and a fair number of them were canceled progressives.
Well,
So,
because you're very concerned about the culture wars that perhaps are a signal of a possible bad future for this country and for this part of the world, that reason stands out. And do you, sort of looking back at 4 reasons, think it deserves to have a place in one of the 4?
oh,
Because
absolutely.
because it is,
Well, the 4
it's a
was
comp-
bifurcated, because I said, look, Putin might believe this, and I actually think he does, because I read a bunch of Putin's speeches, and I have been reading them for 15 years. And my sense of people generally, and this was true of Hitler, it's like, well, what did Hitler believe? Well, did you read what he wrote? He just did what he said he was going to do. And you might think, well, some people are so tricky. They have a whole body of elaborated speech that's completely separate from their personality, and their personality is pursuing a different agenda, and this whole body of speech is nothing but a front. It's like, good luck finding someone that sophisticated. First of all, if you say things long enough, you're going to believe them.
That's a really interesting and fascinating and important point. Even if you start out as a lie, as a propaganda, I think Hitler is an example of somebody that I think really quickly you start to believe the propaganda.
Well,
It's really interesting.
you've thought a lot about AI systems. It's like, don't you become what you practice? And the answer to that is, well, absolutely. We even know the neurology. It's like when you first formulate a concept, huge swaths of your cortex are lit up, so to speak. But as you practice that, first of all, the right hemisphere stops participating, and then the left participates less and less until you build specialized machinery for exactly that conceptual frame. And then you start to see it, not just think it. And so if you're telling the same lies over and over, who do you think you're fooling? Think, well, I can withstand my own lies. Not if they're effective lies. And if they're effective enough to fool millions of people, and then they reflect them back to you, what makes you think you're going to be able to withstand that? You
Yeah, I'm
aren't.
pretty sure
And so
game
I
cards
do
on the
think
front.
Putin believes, to the degree that he believes anything, I do believe that he thinks of himself as a bulwark for Christendom against the degeneration of the West. And that's that third way that Dugin and Putin have been talking about, the philosopher Alexander Dugin and Putin, for 15 years. Now, what that is very amorphous. Solzhenitsyn thought the Russians would have to return to the incremental
think Evie
development
can
of
do
Orthodox
anything to me.
Christianity to escape from the communist trap.
Oh, it might
To
have
some degree,
bite.
that's
It might
happened
not
in Russia
bite.
because there's been a return to Orthodox Christianity. Now, you could say, yeah, but the Orthodox Church has just been co-opted by the state. And I would say there's some evidence for that. I've heard, for example, that the Metropolitan owns, now I don't know if this is true, owns $5 billion worth of personal property. And
Nice.
I would say there's a bit of a moral hazard in that. And it's possible that the Orthodox Church has been co-opted, but there has been somewhat of an Orthodox revival in Russia, and I don't think that's all bad. Now, even if Putin doesn't believe any of this, if he's just a psychopathic manipulator, and unfortunately, I don't think that's true. I've read his speeches. It doesn't look like it to me, and he is by no means the worst Russian leader of the last 100 years.
Well, there's quite a selection there.
There certainly is, but, and I say that knowing that. Even if he doesn't believe it, he's convinced his people that it's true. And so we're stuck with the claim in either case. And that's the point I was trying to make in the article.
Sometimes I'm troubled by people that explain things, and a lot of people reached out to me, experts, telling me how I should feel, what I should think about Ukraine. Oh, you naive Lex, you're so naive, here's how it really is. But then I get to see people that lost their home. I get to see people on the Russian side who believe I genuinely think that there's some degree to which they have love in their heart. They see themselves as heroes saving a land from Nazis.
How else would you motivate young men to go fight?
It's these humans destroying not only their homes, but creating generational hate, destroying the possibility of love towards each other. They're basically creating hate. What I've heard a lot of is on February 24th of this year, hate was born at a scale that region has not seen. hate towards not Vladimir Putin, hate towards not the soldiers in Russia, but hate towards all Russians. Hate that will last generations. And then you can see just the pain there. And then when all these experts talk about agriculture and energy and geopolitics and maybe like what you say with the fighting the ideologies of the woke and so on, I just feel like it's missing something deep, that war is not fought about any of those things. War is started and war is averted based on human beings, based on humanity.
Here's another ugly thought, since we haven't had enough so far. We locked everything down for COVID. How much face-to-face communication was there between the West and Vladimir Putin? How about none? How about that was the wrong amount? Especially given that Europe was completely dependent on Putin for its energy supplies. Not completely, but you know what I mean. Materially and significantly. So maybe he had to go talk to him once every 6 months. Maybe he's in a bit of a bubble. Probably.
And not just an information bubble, how all these experts tell me about.
Yeah. No, a human bubble. You
human
bet,
bubble.
man. Look, one of the things I've really learned, there's a real emphasis on hospitality in the Old Testament. I just brought all these scholars together to talk about Exodus. Hey, I have this security team with me, and they're tough military guys, but they're on board for this mission, let's say. And so they went out of their way to be hospitable to my academic guests. They laid out nice platters of meat and cheese and crackers. They spent all day preparing this house I had rented so that we could have a hospitable time with these scholars, most of whom I didn't know well, but who said they would come and spend 8 days talking about this book with me. We rented some jet skis. We had a nice house. We had fun. We got to know each other. And we got to trust each other because we could see that we could have some fun and that we could let our hair down a bit. We didn't have to be on guard. And that made the talks way deeper. And then we found out we couldn't get through Exodus in 8 days. And so I had proposed very early on that we're going to double the length. And so I pulled 8 people out of their lives for 8 days. That's not an easy thing to do. It's also quite expensive. And Daily Wire Plus people picked all that up. And they said yes right away. Said, we'd love to do this again. Well, why? Well, partly because intellectually it was unbelievably engaging. I learned so much. It'll take me like a year to digest it, if I can ever digest it. But they had a really good time. And so when they were offered that combination of intellectual challenge, let's say in hospitality, it was a no-brainer. They just said, every one of them said, if I can do it in any way, I will definitely be there. I went to Washington a bunch of times, and the culture of hospitality has broken down in Washington. 40% of congressmen sleep in their offices. They don't have apartments. Their family isn't there with them. They don't have social occasions with their fellow Democrats or Republicans, much less across the table. And I tried to have some meetings in Washington that were bilateral a couple of times, get young Republican congressmen and Democrats together to talk. And as soon as they talk, they think, it was so interesting because one of the lunches was about 15 people, half Democrats and half Republicans. And all I'd asked them to do was just spend 3 minutes talking about why you decided to become a congressman, which is not a job I would take, by the way. Spend 25 hours a week fundraising on the telephone. Your family isn't there with you. You have to run for re-election every 2 years. You're beholden to the party apparatus, right? You're vilified constantly. This is not, people think, well, this is a job for the privileged. It's like, yeah, you go and run for Congress and find out how much fun it is and put your family on the line and then have to beg for your job every 2 years while your enemies, the worst of your enemies and the worst of your friends are viciously henpecking you. And so anyways, we had them all sit around the table and said, okay, just say why you ran for Congress. It was so cool, especially for Canadians, because you Americans, you're so bloody theatrical. It's something to watch. It was like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington for every one of them. It's like, well, this country has given us so much. Our families have been we've benefited so much from our time here. We think this is a wonderful country. We really felt that we should give back. And the next one would talk. It was like exactly the same story. And then it didn't matter if they were Republican or Democrat. You couldn't tell the difference. No one could. And was it genuine? It's like, well, are you genuine? You think these people are worse than you? First of all, they're not. Second of all, they're probably better, all things considered. It's not that easy to become a congressman. And I'm sure there's some bad apples in the bunch, but by and large, you walk away from your meetings with these people and you think, pretty impressive.
They really are giving a part of themselves in the name of service. Maybe over time, they become cynical and become jaded and worn down by the whole system. But I think a lot of it
Could you imagine that?
is healed, I think. And I don't think I'm in part naive, but not fully. That a lot of it is healed through the power of conversation, just basic social interaction. I do think that the effects of this pandemic,
especially by listening,
listen, just sitting there, and it doesn't have to be talking about the actual issue. It's actually humor, and all those kinds of things, about personal struggles, all those kinds
Bummer, I
of things that
couldn't get one
remind you
more.
that you're all just humans.
Yeah. Well, the great leaders that I've met, and I've met some now, they go listen to their constituents. It's not a policy discussion. It's not an ideology discussion. They go say, okay, what's your life like, and what are your problems, and tell me about them. And then they listen, and then they're struck by them, and then they gather up all that misery and they bring it to the congressional office or to the parliament, and they think, here's what the people are crying out for. And the good leaders, that's a leader. Leader listens. So I talked to Jimmy Carr about comedy, and he's sold out stages worldwide on a tour, being funny. That's hard. He said, comedy is the most stand-up comedy, which is what I do in some real sense. It's a thing I do that it's most akin to what I'm doing on my book tours, I would say. It's the closest analog. He said it's the most dialogical enterprise. I thought,
Did I not
why?
catch
What do you mean? 'Cause see, it's just a monologue, and it's a prepared monologue. I mean, you have to interact
Okay,
dynamically
I'm gonna
with the
go-
audience while you're telling your jokes, and you got to get the timing right. But
I'm gonna go catch
you have
the
a
thing
body of
first.
jokes. I said, well, here's how you prepare the jokes. And I've already told this by other comedians. You go to 50 clubs before you go on your tour, and you got some new material, and you think it's funny, and you go into a club and you lay out your new material, and people laugh at some of it, and you pay attention to what they laugh at and what they don't laugh at. So you subject yourself to the judgment of the crowd. You get rid of everything that isn't funny. And if you do that enough, even if you're not that funny, the crowd will tell you what's funny. So you can imagine you do 50 shows, and each is an hour long, and you collect 2 minutes of humor from each show. So you throw away 2 hours, more than 98% of it. Collect 2 minutes per show. So you're not very funny at all. You're not funny 2% of the time. You aggregate that, man, you're a scream. And so that's what a leader does. That is what a leader does. Is goes out and he aggregates the misery, and the hopes. And then I do think that's revivifying to someone who would otherwise be cynical and jaded, because then the person can save
Good
themselves.
sneeze.
Despite the inadequacies of the system and
That
my
one cleared the
inadequacies,
sinuses right up.
I'm gathering up the misery and the hope, and I'm bringing it forward where it can be
Giving
redressed.
giving it a voice.
Yep, that's right, giving it a voice.
Can you actually take me through a day, because this is fascinating, through your comedy tour? What does a day in the life of Jordan Peterson look like? Which is this very interesting day. Let's look at the day when you have to speak. Preparing your mind, thinking of what you're going to talk about, preparing yourself physically, mentally to interact with the crowd. Through the actual speaking, how do you adjust what you're thinking through, and how do you come down from that so you can start all again as a limited biological system?
Well, I'm usually up by 7 and ready to go by 7:30 or 8. And
Coffee?
No.
Nothing.
Steak and water.
How many times a day steak?
That's all I eat.
How many times?
3 or 4, depending on the day.
Steak and water.
Steak and sparkling water. Yeah, so
I did
monastic asceticism, man.
Well, I did the proper. I usually eat just once a day. I did the proper Jordan Peterson last night. Just ate 2 steaks.
And how was that?
It was wonderful.
Yeah, well, if you have to only eat one thing, could be worse. So anyways, I'm ready to go at 8 because we're generally moving,
What does moving mean?
Flying.
You're constantly
flying somewhere.
Okay.
And we usually use private flights now because the commercial airlines aren't reliable enough, and you cannot not make a venue, right? So that's rule number 1 on a tour. You make the show. So everything, and then rule number 2 is anybody who causes any trouble on the tour is gone, because there is 0 room for error. Now, no, there's 0 room for unnecessary, unaddressed error. So because there's going to be errors. The guys I have around me now, if they make a mistake, they fix it right away. So, and that's great.
There's a lot of people relying on you to be there, so you have to be there.
Like 4,000 people typically. So then I'm on the plane, and I usually write, or often, because there's no internet on the plane, and that's a good use of time. So I'm writing a new book, so I write on the plane.
Typing or handwriting?
Typing. Yeah, typing. And then we land and we go to, it's usually early afternoon by then, we go to a hotel. It's usually a nice hotel. It's not corporate. I don't really like corporate hotels. My secretary and one of my logistics guys has got quite good at picking kind of adventurous hotels, boutique hotels. They're usually in the old parts of the city, especially in Europe, somewhere interesting. And so we go there, and then lunch usually, and sometimes that's an air fryer and a steak in the hotel room, and I leave a trail of air fryers behind me all across the world. And then Tammy and I usually go out and have a walk or something and take a look at the city. and then I have a rest for like an hour.
This dude literally
Or an
be
hour.
buying an
Like
air
a nap?
fryer so
Yeah,
that he can
I have
air
to sleep
fry
for
a
20 minutes,
steak
and that's about all I can sleep. But I need to do that in the late afternoon.
Never refreshes your mind.
Yeah, that wakes me up
while
again
he's
for the
on
evening.
tour.
And then Tam has to sleep longer.
What
She's still
the
recovering.
fuck,
from
dude?
her
Why would
illness,
you
so
commit
she
so
has to sleep
hard
longer
to
in the
this
afternoon, and
steak
that's
thing?
absolutely
I just
necessary
don't
for
get
both
it.
of us, or things
I
start to
really
get
hope
frayed.
it actually works
So
for
then
him.
we
I
go to
really
the
hope
venue,
this is like the one thing
and then I usually
that he's
sit
like
for
right about.
an hour.
That he's like that
If
he's
I'm
like
going to lecture,
actually
I've been doing a
not
lot of Q&As,
insane
and
about.
that's
That
a
it's
little easier.
actually
If I'm
helping
going to
him.
lecture, I have to sit for an hour, and then I think, okay, what question am I trying to investigate? I have to have that. That's the point. What mystery am I trying to unravel? It's usually associated with one of the rules in my book. Because
I feel like it's a
technically
fucking
book
meme.
tour,
Like
but
I'm so
each
used
of
to
those rules is
conservatives
an
memeing
investigation into an
everything
ethic.
that I'm
And
just like
each of them
ready
points to
for
a deeper sort of
JP to
mystery
come
in
out
some
and be like,
sense,
oh
and
yeah, no, it
there's
was
no
like
end to the
literally a
amount that can be
meme. I
explored.
just wanted to be like
So I have the
the
question.
opposite of a vegan.
The question might be something like,
It was like a spite-driven act
put your house in perfect
because of
order
how much
before
I
you
hate
criticize the world.
vegans.
Okay.
And it's like
What does that mean exactly? What does house mean? What does put?
That would be.
What does
oh
put
my
mean? That
gosh.
active verb.
That's what it
What
feels
does
like.
perfect and order mean? Why
That's what it feels
before
like he's
you
building
criticize the
to.
world? What does it mean to
Like a
criticize?
big reveal
What does it mean
like
to
that.
criticize the world? How can you do that properly or improperly? So I start to think about how to decompose the question.
And you start to think which of these decompositions are important to really dig into.
Yeah, well then they'll strike me. It's like, okay, there's something there that I've been maybe noodling around on that I would like to investigate further. Then I
What?
think, okay, how can I approach this problem? I think, well, I have this story that I know, I have
I
this
think this
story,
is
and I have
level
this story, but
40,
I haven't
yeah.
juxtaposed them before, and there's going to be some interesting interaction in the juxtaposition. So I have the question, and I kind of have a framework of interpretation, and then I have some potential narrative places I could go.
That was a
And then
lot
I
of
think, okay, I
damage,
can go
actually.
juggle that and see what happens.
Yeah, get
And
shit
so then what I want to do
on.
is concentrate on that process while attending to the audience to make sure that the words are landing, and then see if I can delve into it deeply enough so that a narrative emerges spontaneously with an ending. Now, I'm sure you've experienced this in podcasts, right? Maybe I'm wrong, but my experience has been if I fall into the
fuck?
conversation and we know
Little
about the
kitty.
time frame, there'll be a natural narrative
Blech.
arc. And then, so you'll kind
That
of
was
know when the
probably a
midpoint
little
is.
overkill.
You'll kind of see when you're reaching a conclusion. And then if you really pay attention, you can see that's a good place to
7
stop.
out of 10 defeated.
It's kind of you come to a point, and you have to be alert and patient to see that, and you have to be willing to be satisfied with where you've got to. But if you do that, and then it's like a comedian making the punchline work. It's like got all these balls in the air, and they're going somewhere, and this is how they come together. And people love that, right? To say, oh, this and this and this and this and this, whack, together.
He just
Now,
sounds
it's
like
an
an
insight, and
insane
it is very
person
much like
whenever
a
he
punchline.
talks.
Well, that's
So-
interesting because your mind, actually, I'm a fan of your podcast too, and you are always driving towards that. I would say for me, in a podcast conversation, there's often a kind of Alice in Wonderland type of exploration.
Down the rabbit hole, man.
And then a new thing pops up. The more absurd, the wilder, the better.
I wanna go
Conversations
up,
with
but-
Elon are like this.
Yeah, I
It's
bet.
like, actually, the more you drive towards an arc, the more uncomfortable you start to get in a fun, absurd conversation because, I'm now one of the normies. No, I don't want that. I want to be, I want the rabbit. I want the crazy.
Yeah.
Because it
No,
makes it more
fuck you.
fun. But
Yeah.
somehow, throughout it, there is wisdom that you try to grasp at,
Well,
such that there is a thread.
well, that's the thing, man. You're following the thread, eh?
yeah,
The thread's
try.
the thread. Well, that's right. That's what we're trying to do. That thread is the proper balance between structure and spontaneity, and it manifests itself as the instinct of meaning, and that's the logos in the dialogos, and it really is the logos, and God only knows what that means. You know, I mean, the biblical claim is that logos is the fundamental principle of reality, and I think that's true. I actually think that's true, because I think that meaning that guides you. Well, here's a way of thinking about it. I've been writing about this recently. What's real?
He's so.
Matter. So, okay, that's one answer. What's real? What matters is real. So that's how you act. Okay, so that's different than matter. It's like, okay, what's the most real of what matters? How about pain? Why is it the most real? Try arguing it away. Good luck.
Good Buddhist.
So pain is the fundamental reality. All right. Well, that's rough. Doesn't that lead to nihilism and hopelessness? Yeah,
No.
doesn't it lead to a philosophy that's antithetical towards being? The most fundamental reality is pain. Yes. Is there anything more fundamental than pain? Love. Really?
Oh my god, is he gonna do
You're
the
in
crying
pain.
thing? Oh no.
Love
He's
and truth?
crying.
That's what you got?
Fuck, he's like,
And you
this
know-
podcast is so boring. This conversation is so weird.
If they're more powerful than pain, maybe they're the most
I'm gonna do
real
the
things.
crying thing. That'll get him.
When you think about reality, what is real? That is the most real thing.
Well, it's a tough one, right? Because you have to, because if you're a scientist or materialist, to think, well, the matter is the most real. It's like, well, you don't know what the matter is.
Yeah.
And then when push comes to shove, and it will, you'll find out what's most real.
I feel like this is missing. Physical reality is missing some of the things. So of course pain has a biological component and all those kinds of things, but it's missing something deep about the human condition that at least the modern science is not able to describe. But
Okay,
it
I
is
know
reaching
nobody's here.
towards that.
Yeah, it
And
is.
But it's
the reason-
responsible for me to talk to chat.
One way to describe it,
Even
as
if
you're
there is no
describing, is
chat,
the reason
okay?
it's reaching it is because underneath of science is this assumption.
Jordan
that
Peterson's talking about very real
there's a
concepts
deep
here.
Logos.
Luckily,
thing to this whole thing we're trying to
he's
do.
allowed to talk about it.
Well, you know,
However,
there's two traditions, right? In
it is
some sense,
cringe,
there's two logos
and he's a
traditions.
very cringe person.
There's the
So it's okay to laugh at him a
rational
little bit.
Enlightenment tradition. That's a logos tradition, and it insists that there's a logos in nature, and that
But
science
when
is the
you're
way to
talking
approach it.
about like
And then
super
there's the
deep topics
Judeo-Christian
like
logos,
this,
which is more embodied and more spiritual. And I
I
would say
don't
the
feel
West is
comfortable
actually an attempt to unite
commenting
those
on
two.
them right now.
And it's the proper attempt to unite those two,
Going through my own shit.
because they need to be united.
I'm a man of
And I
only
see the union
27.
coming in your terms. You know, I talked to
I
Frans de
don't know
Waal,
at
for
all.
example, about the animating principle of chimpanzee sovereignty. And that's pretty close biologically. Is it power? Because that's the claim, even from the biologists often. The most dominant chimp has the best reproductive success. It's like, oh yeah? Dominant, eh? You mean using compulsion? Okay, let's look. Are the chimps who use compulsion the most successful? And the answer is sporadically and rarely. And for short, well, that's sporadically, for short periods of time. Why? Because they
Whoa,
meet an
1,400 bucks.
unpleasant end.
Let's go.
The subordinates over whom they exercise arbitrary control wait for a weak moment and then tear them into shreds, right? Every dictator's terror, and for good reason. And de Waal has showed that the alpha chimps, the males, who do have preferential mating access are often and reliably
I need
the
to
best
put more juice in
peacemakers and
this.
the most
I
reciprocal.
keep forgetting.
And so even among chimps, the principle of sovereignty is something like iterated reciprocity. And that's a way better principle than power. And it's something like, I've been thinking, what's the antithesis of the spirit of
Oh,
power?
it's a fucking ice
I think
block
it's
in
the
there.
spirit of play. And you know, I don't know what you think about that, but when you have a good podcast conversation, you already described it in some sense as play. It's like there's a structure, right? Because it's an ordered conversation. But you want there to be play in the system. And if you get that right, then it's really engaging. And then it seems to have its own narrative arc. I'm not trying to impose that, even though that's another thing I don't do. I didn't come to this conversation at all thinking, here's what I want out of a conversation with Lex Friedman. Like instrumentally, I thought, I'll go talk to Lex. Why? I like his podcasts. He's doing something right. I don't know what it is. He asks interesting questions. I'll go have a conversation with him. Where's it going to go? Wherever it goes.
Embracing the spirit of play. So when you have this, when you're lecturing, you're going in front of the crowd.
Yeah.
You thought of a question.
Yeah.
You get on the stage. First of all, are you nervous at all?
I'm very nervous when I'm sitting down thinking through the structure initially, which is why my wife and I have been doing Q&As, and that's easier on me.
Yeah. It's the it's the way comedians are nervous. Like Joe Rogan just did his special, so this weekend. So he now has to sit nervously like a
Oh
comedian
no,
does,
am I gonna have
just
to
like,
catch all the worm?
I have no material now.
Right.
I have to start
Well,
from
that's
scratch.
it. When I was doing the lectures constantly instead of the Q&As, basically what I was doing was writing a whole book chapter every night. And, you know, now that's a bit of an exaggeration because I would return to themes that I had developed. But it's not really an exaggeration because I didn't ever just go over rote material, ever. So it's very demanding, and that part's
I
nerve-wracking
just had to
because
show
I
her
sit down,
one.
it's
How
now
about I
before
have
the
to
show,
show
and
her
I
all
think,
of them?
can I do this? And, you know, the answer is, well, you did it 1,000 times.
What do
But
we
that's
have?
not this time.
Yeah.
It's like, can I come up with a question? Can I think through the structure? Can I pull off the spontaneous narrative? Can I pull it together? And the answer is, I don't know. And so then I get it together in my mind, I think. And that's hard. It takes effort, and it's nerve-wracking. Okay, I got it. But then there's the moment you go out on stage and you think, well, I know I had it, but can I do it? No notes. And then the question is, well, you're going to find out. Well, you do it. And so then I go out on stage, and I don't talk to the audience. I talk to one person at a time. And you can talk to one person, you know, because you know how to do that. So I talk to a person, and not too long because I don't want to make them too nervous. And then someone else, and then I'm in contact with the audience, and then I can tell if the words are landing. And I listen. It's like, are they rustling around? Are they dead quiet? because you want dead quiet.
Oh, I see. That's what focus sounds like.
That's
You're in it together.
Did she even
Yeah.
fucking
Well, and I also,
add
here's a good
anything?
rule if you're learning to speak publicly. I never say a word till everyone is 100% quiet. And it's a great way to start a talk because you're setting the frame, eh? And if the frame is, well, I'll talk while you're talking, the message is, well, you can talk. This is a place where everybody can talk. It's like, no, it's not. This is a place where people paid to hear me talk. So I'm not going to talk till everyone's listening. And so then you get that stillness. And then you just wait, because that stillness turns into an expectation. And then it turns into a kind of nervous expectation. It's like, what the hell is he doing? It's not manipulative. It's a sense of timing. It's like just when that's right, you think, okay, now it's time to start.
Well, the interesting thing about that nervous expectation is, from an audience perspective, we're in it together.
Yeah.
I mean, into that silence, there's a togetherness to it.
Of course. It's the union of everyone's attention.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a great thing. I mean, you love that at a concert when it's not silence then, but when everyone's attention is unified and everyone's moving in unison, it's like we're all worshiping the same thing, right? And that would be the point of the conversation, the point of the lecture. And the worship is the direction of attention towards it. And it's communion because everyone's doing it at the same time. And so, I mean, there's not much difference between a lecture theater and a church in that regard, right? It's the same fundamental layout and structure. And they're very integrally associated with one another. One really grew out of the other.
All
The
right,
lecture
let's go.
theater grew out of the church. So it's perfectly reasonable to be thinking about it in those terms. And then, so after
Oh wait,
the lecture,
I'm going to
we play a
actually...
piece of music that is a piece of music that I've been producing with some musicians for a couple of books I'm going to release in the fall. Terrible books. ABC of Childhood Tragedy, they're called. Dark books. Dark and comical books. Terrible books. Heartbreaking illustrations. We set them to music, and so we play a piece from that. And then afterwards, I usually meet about 150 people to have photographs. And so each of
And
those is a little...
Is there a little sparkle of human connection that you have to...
A lot. It's very intense. 10 seconds with every person. You think, how can 10 seconds be intense? It's like, pay enough attention. It gets intense real quick.
Does it break your heart to say goodbye so many times?
It's like being in a wedding lineup, at a wedding that you want to be at, and everybody's dressed up, and that's so weird, because I bought these expensive suits when I went on tour, and it broke my heart because I spent so much money on them. I thought, God, that's completely unconscionable. I thought, no way, man.
Yeah.
I'm in this 100%, and so I'm going to dress with respect, and like 60% of the audience comes in 2 or 3 piece suits. They're all dressed up. Then there's this line to greet me, and they're all happy to see me. That's not so hard to take, although it is in a sense, right? Because normal interactions are pretty shallow, and you think, I don't want shallow interactions. Like, yes, you do most of the time.
Yeah, it's intense.
It's very intense.
And I don't know if
But you've had a taste of this, no doubt, because people recognize.
Yeah, but I also have, when a person recognizes me and they come with love and they're often brilliant people, one of the thoughts I have to deal with, one of the dragons in my own mind is, thinking that I don't deserve that kind of attention. And so...
Well, you probably don't.
Right,
But maybe
I don't.
you could.
So it's a burden in that I have to step up to be the kind of person that deserves that, not deserves that, but in part deserves that kind of attention. And
Well,
that's like, holy shit.
It's crucially important, too, because if someone comes up to you in an airport and they know who you are and they're brave enough to admire you or who you are attempting to be, and you make a mistake, they will never forget it.
Yeah.
So it's a
I need to
high-stakes
put
enterprise.
juice
And the flip side of
my-
that, especially with young people, a few words you can say can change the direction of their life.
One way or another. And so I really have to watch this, too, in airports. I do not like
yeah,
airports. I do
stretch.
not like the creeping totalitarianism in airports. They've always bothered me.
Yes.
They really bother me. And I'm an unpleasant travel companion for my wife sometimes because of that, although I think we've worked that out, thank God, because we're doing a lot of traveling. But most of the security guards and the border personnel, all those people, they know me. And as
2
a general rule, they're
days.
positively predisposed to me. And
It's
so
10
if
o'clock,
I'm peevish
2
or irritable,
days. Until Scarlet
then-
and Violet.
well, that's
Let's
not good.
go.
It's not good. And so that's a tightrope to walk too, because I do not like that creeping totalitarianism. But by the same token, if you're just one of the crowd, sometimes it's good just to be one of the crowd, and then you're a little irritable and people can just brush that off. But if you're someone they have dared to open their heart to, because that's what admiration is, and then you betray that, then that's they'll never forget it. And then they'll tell everyone too. So that takes a lot of alertness. And so Tammy and our life has got complicated, because in Toronto, for example, we can't really just go for a walk. It's always a high drama production, because always people come up and they have some heart-rending story to tell. And I'm not being cynical about that.
Yes.
It's a hard thing to bear.
I
Because
forgot to link
people
my
don't do that. They don't
shit
just
to
open
Twitter.
themselves up to you like that and share the tragedy of their life. But that's an everyday occurrence. And so when we go up to our cottage, which is out of the city, it's a relief, because as wonderful as that is, like I have a weird life because everywhere I go, it's very weird. It's like I'm surrounded by old friends because I walk down the street in any city now, virtually, and people say, "Hello, Dr. Peterson, so nice to see you," or they say better things than that, very rarely bad things. One experience in 5,000 maybe, very rare, although you don't forget those either. But it's very strange. So,
And there's an intimacy. They know you well, and because they leap into, they avoid the small talk often.
they leap into familiarity.
It really is like it's an old friend, and it feels like that. For me personally, the experience is the goodbye hurts because there's a sense where you're never going to see that friend again.
Right. Yeah, that's a strange thing, eh?
So to me, a lot of it just feels like goodbyes.
Well, and it is. You're right about that. And I mean, that's, I suppose, in some sense, part of the pain of opening yourself up to people. Because they also, Tammy has been struck particularly. She said, "I really never knew what men were like." I said, "Well, what do you mean?" She said, "I cannot believe how polite the men are when they come and talk to you. Because it's always the same. The pattern's very similar. The person comes up. They're mostly men, not always, but mostly. And they're tentative, and they're very polite. Very, very polite. They say, "I hope I'm not bothering you. Do you mind, do you mind?" And I say, "But they're not bothering me. And I'm doing everything I can to not be the guy who's bothered by that." It's like, who do you think you are?
Yeah. Yes.
You're the guy that, is famous and now is above that?
Yeah.
You don't want to be that guy. So you want to be grateful all the time when people open up like that. And so you got to be alert and on point to do that properly, like right away, because for you, it's 5 seconds or 10 seconds or 20 seconds, whatever it is. But for them, they've opened up. And so you can really nail them if you're foolish.
After the 150 people, how do you come down from that? How do you find yourself again?
Well,
So
that was
the
often
rest.
when I got caught in Twitter traps, because I'm so burnt out by then from the talk and the audience interactions and the whole day. Because it's a new city, it's a new hotel, it's a new 5,000 people, it's a new book chapter, it's a whole new horizon of ideas, and it's off to another city the next day. I'm so burnt out by then that I'm not as good at controlling my impulses as I might be, and Twitter was a real catastrophe for that because it would hook me, and then I couldn't. Like I used to, when I was working on my book a lot, I used to call Tammy. I'd say, "Look, you have to come and get me. I can't stop. I can't stop." I got tired, and then I kind of, because it's part of a kind of hypomanic focus. I couldn't quit. It's like, "Oh no, I'm still writing. I need to get away from this," but I couldn't stop. And so it's better to read something, book,
Fiction, nonfiction,
fiction. Stephen King. I was reading a lot of Stephen King when I was on tour last time. That was good. I like Stephen King a
So
lot.
great narratives.
Great characterization, So, and there's a familiarity about Stephen King's writing too, that he writes about people and so I really found that a relief, and so that was useful. And that in order to tolerate this, let's say, or to be able to sustain it, well, that's taken a lot of negotiation on the part of Tammy and I, because she's dragged into this, and her life is part of this, whatever this is, and she's had to find her way, and has. For example, now she has a different hotel room than me when we travel. And she found that she didn't want to be on the tour this spring, and I was ill again for part of it, and that made it complicated. But she went away back home, and she came back, and she said she was nervous, but she said, "I think I need my own room." And part of me was not happy with that. I said, "What do you mean you need your, are we not married anymore? It's like you need your own room?" And she said, "Well, I can't." She has to do exercises because she was really sick, and she has to keep herself in shape. And she has to have some time to do that. She does a lot of prayer and meditation, and she needs the time. And she has her own podcast, which is going quite well, and she needs the time. And I trust her. And she said, "Well, I need this in order to continue." And I thought, well, okay. If you need this in order to continue.
Fuck you.
Yes. Because she went away and didn't say, "Well, I don't want to be on the tour. I don't want to do this anymore." She went away and prayed, let's say, "How can I continue to do this?" And that was the answer. And so she has her own hotel room. And that was a really good decision on her part. And she's very good and getting better all the time at figuring out what has to happen for her to make this sustainable. And all that's been is a plus, because I don't want to travel without her, and I don't want her life to be miserable, and I want her to be fully on board. And so she has to be properly selfish, like everyone does in a relationship.
Yeah, well, and you have to, not just that, this is a weird thing that you're doing, and you have to, both you and her have to figure out how how to manage this very intense intellectual
Well,
social
there's
journey.
another element to it too that I
Yeah,
didn't
I've
tell
gotta
you
have
about. So that was
a stronger
typical day, but it's
fighting
missing a
type
big
move at this
component
point.
because usually we also have a dinner with like 30 cultural representatives, I suppose, 10 to 30 from each country, because I have a network of people who have networks who are setting me up with key decision makers in each country. And so then we have like an hour and a half of that. Now, sometimes that's on a day when I don't have a talk, but sometimes the talks are back to back. And so she also has to manage that and to be gracious. And then people are showing us exciting things and tours in the cities, and which is all like it's a surfeit of wonderful.
Yes,
you know?
exactly. But it's still, you have to be there for it. You have to be present for it mentally.
Yeah.
As a curious mind, as an intellectual mind. How do you get this thing?
Fortunately, that is almost never a problem. Even when I was unbelievably ill for about 3 years. I thought about that a lot too, you know, that I didn't do a really good job of explaining that while I was ill, because it appeared in some sense that the reason I was ill was because I was taking benzodiazepines. That isn't why. I was ill, and then I took them, and very low dose, and I took that for a long time, and it helped whatever was wrong with me, and it looks like it was an allergy, or maybe multiple allergies. And then that stopped working, and so I took a little bit more for about a month, and that made it way worse, and so then I cut back a lot, and then things really got out of hand.
So there was a deeper thing
Oh yeah,
in the
definitely.
benzo.
Oh yeah.
What can you put words to?
Well, I had a lot of immune. My daughter, as everyone knows,
Guys,
very
I wasn't addicted
reactive
to
immune system, and
drugs.
Tammy has 3 immunological conditions, each of them quite
It
serious.
was some
And I have
unexplainable,
psoriasis
deeper,
and peripheral uveitis,
sub-psychological
autoimmune
thing.
condition, and alopecia areata.
I
and,
promise.
Chronic gum disease.
I'm not
all
a
of which
drug
appear to be
addict,
allergy-related.
guys.
And so Michaela seems to
I'm
have
not
got
like
all of that.
Hunter
And so
Biden,
and that I
that
think
thing that
was
we're
at
going
the
to talk
bottom,
about
because
for
I
the
also
next
had this
2
proclivity
fucking
to
years because we
depression
got our
as part of
asses
my
handed
family
to
history.
us.
But I think that was all immunological as far as I can tell. So one of the things that's happened to me, I always noticed I really couldn't breathe. Like I could breathe about 1/5 as much as I sometimes could. And so I was always short of breath.
What does that mean?
It looks like what that was, perhaps, was I was always on the border of an anaphylactic reaction, which is not pleasant. And
What?
that's hypersympathetic activation, no parasympathetic activation. Couldn't relax at all.
That's an
No.
immunological response.
Allergic response. Yeah.
I don't believe this.
So, anyways, that was what's in. Now, this, I don't like to talk about this much because it's so bloody radical, and you know I don't like to propagate it. But this diet seems to have stopped all of that. I don't have psoriasis. All of the patches have gone.
Yeah.
My gum disease, which is incurable, I had multiple surgeries to deal with it, is completely gone. Took 3 years. My right eye, which was quite cloudy, is cleared up completely. What else has changed? Well, I lost 50 pounds, and like
I really hope all of this
Yeah,
is
well,
true.
I should mention that
No shit, you
I
lost
too
50
am
pounds,
not
bro.
a deep investigator of nutritional science. I have my skepticism towards the degree to which it is currently a science, because like a lot of complex systems, it's full of mystery and full of profiteers, the people that profit of different kinds of diets. But I should say, for me personally, it does seem that I feel by far the best when I eat only meat. It's very interesting, and I discovered that a
ridiculous.
long time ago. First of all,
How do you discover it?
so by the discovery went like this. I started listening to ultra marathon runners about 15 years ago, and they started talking about fat adapted running. So I first discovered that I don't have to run super fast to enjoy running. That in fact I really enjoy running at a slower pace. So that was like step one. It's like, oh, okay, if I maintain something called the MAF rule, which is a pretty low heart rate. If I maintain that, you can actually get pretty fast while maintaining a pretty slow average speed in general. Anyway, they fuel themselves on low carb diets. So I got into that. On top of that, they also fast often. So I discovered how incredible my mind feels when fasted. You know, people call it intermittent fasting, but
Well, that's an optimization of death, eh? Because when you fast, your body, logically and obviously, if you think about it biologically, is, well, what does your body scavenge first? Well, damaged tissue. So, I know the literature on fasting to some degree, and it's very compelling literature. If you starve dogs down, I think it's 20% below, rats too, below their optimal body weight, they live 30% longer.
Yeah.
That's a lot, 30%. Like, it's like 30%. Yeah, 30%.
Well, there is aspect to a lot of these things that make me nervous, because I always feel like there's no free lunch that I'm going to pay for somehow. But there's a focus that I am able to attain when I fast, especially when I eat once a day. My mind is almost like nervously focused. It's almost like an anxiety, but a positive one, or one that I can channel into just like an excitement.
You know, I wonder how much of that's associated with, well, imagine that signifies lack of food, which is not that hard to imagine. Well, maybe you should
Why
be
are
a
we
lot
supposed
more
to say
alert in
no?
that
We
situation,
always
right?
battle
Biologically
accordance.
speaking, because you're in hunting mode, let's say. not desperate, but in hunting mode. And God only knows. Maybe human beings should be in hunting mode all the time.
Often, but we don't know that. So I wonder if it has a stress on the system that long term causes the system to
It doesn't look like it.
It seems in case of fasting not. And then on top of that, I discovered that the thing I enjoy, I just don't enjoy eating fat as much.
Mm-hmm.
So I love eating meat. And
Mm-hmm.
when you talk about low carb diet, so I just discovered through that process, if somewhat fatty meat, but just meat, I just feel a lot of the things that make me feel weird about food, like a little groggy or like full or just whatever. The aspects of food that I don't enjoy, they're not there with meat, and I'm still able to enjoy company. And when I eat once a day and eat meat,
I
at
haven't
least in
caught
Texas,
so many Pokemon.
you could still have all the merriment.
I've passed
Yeah.
on so many
Yeah.
water
You have dinner with
Pokemon
friends.
now.
Now I don't
That
do
I have
the,
Basque Legion.
you know,
The
you have a
temptation to
very
go back
serious
and spend
thing
another fucking
that,
10 hours in previous regions. Oh
there's
my god,
health
it's so
benefits
high.
that you are very serious about. For me, I can still drink whiskey.
Mhm.
I'll still do the things that add a little bit of
Spice.
spice into the thing.
Yeah.
Now, when you completely remove the spice, it does become more difficult.
Yeah, it's more difficult socially. And Tammy seems to only be able to eat lamb, although she might be able to eat non-aged beef. And that makes traveling complicated too, right? Because, well, for obvious reasons. It's like, really, that's all you can eat? Yeah, well, c'est la vie. And maybe that's a form of craziness, but
If we can return to actually the thing you were talking about when you were thinking about a question before the lecture,
yeah.
let me ask you about thinking in general. This is something maybe that you and Jim Keller think a lot about, is thinking how to think.
Oh, I forgot how slow you
How
have
do
to
you
move through this
think
part.
through an idea?
Well, first of all, I think, okay, that's a really good question. We tried to work that out with this essay app that my son and I have developed, because if you're going to write, first question is, well, what should I write about?
What's
Well,
the name of the app?
Essay.app. And, well, the first question is, well, what bugs you? What's bugging you? This is such a cool thing. It's like, where's my destiny? Well, what bothers you? Well, that's where your destiny is. Your destiny is to be found in what bothers you. Why did those things bother you? There's a lot of things you could be bothered by. Like a million things, man. But some things grip you. They bug you. And they might make you resentful and bitter. Because they bug you so much. Like, they're your things, man. They've got you. So then I look for a question that I would like the answer to. That I don't, and I would really like the answer to it. So I don't assume I already have the answer. Because I would actually really like to have the answer. So if I could get a better answer, great. And so that's the first thing. And that's like a prayer. It's
Can't
like,
you catch
okay,
Gibble in this cave?
here's a mystery. I would like to delve into it further. Well, so that's humility. It's like, here's a mystery, which means I don't know. I would like to delve into it further, which means I don't know enough already. And then comes the revelation. It's like, well, what's a revelation? Well, if
Do
you
I
ask
just
yourself a
stand here while he
question,
does it? Yes.
it's a real question. Do you get an answer or not? An answer is, well, yeah, thoughts start to appear in your head. So
From somewhere.
that's
Let's
right,
go.
from somewhere.
Where do they come from? Do you have a sense?
Depends on
Fucking
what you're
Alpha
aiming at.
Crobat's sick as shit, though.
Depends on the question. But
No, it does to some degree.
Come back to
Depends
daddy.
depends on your intent.
Alpha
So imagine that
Crobat.
your intent is to make things better. Then maybe they come from the place that's designed to make things better. Maybe your intent is to make things worse. Then they come from hell.
What?
You think, not really. It's like, you're so sure about that, are
but
you?
is
Whatever.
your intent conscious? Like, are you able to
It's
respect what the
conscious and habitual, right? Because as you practice
Let's
something consciously, it becomes
go.
habitual. But it's conscious. It's like when I sit down
What?
before I do a lecture, I think, okay, what's the goal here? To do the best
Stupid.
job I can. To what end? Well, people are coming here not for political issues. They're coming here because they're trying to make their lives better. Okay, so what
Wait,
do we
I
do?
touched it.
We're
Okay,
conducting
there
a
we
joint
go.
investigation into the nature of that which makes life better. Okay, what's my role? To do as good a job about that as possible. What state of mind do I have to be in? Am I annoyed about the theater? Or am I clued in and thrilled that 4,000 people have showed up at substantial expense and trouble to come and listen to me talk? And if I'm not in that state of mind, I think, well, maybe I need something to eat, or maybe I need to talk to someone, because that ingratitude is no place to start. It's like I should be thrilled to be there, obviously. And so that orientation has to be there. And then is it conscious? All this is conscious. What am I serving? The highest good I can conceptualize. What is that? I have some sense, but I don't know it in the final analysis, which is why the investigation is being conducted. Who's doing it? Me, whoever I'm communing with, and the audience. And so I try to get myself, and I chase everybody away for that. It's like I have to do that by myself.
Are you writing stuff down?
Yes, at that
Thunderfang
point,
is
I
only
just
65.
make point notes, and it's usually about maybe 30 notes. But then
I
on
didn't know
stage
the
I never
Fangs
refer to them, and I
were
often
only
don't even
65
use the
powers, though they were
structure that I laid
75.
out.
Kind of an interesting thing. From where do powerful phrases come from? Do you try to encapsulate an idea
interesting.
into a sentence or two?
Well, when I talk, I practice this consciously since 1985. I try to feel and see if the words are stepping stones or foundation stones, right? It's like, is this solid? Is this word solid? Is this phrase solid? Is this sentence solid? It's a real sense of fundamental foundation under each word. And I suppose people ask me if I pray, and I would say I pray before every
bought
word.
those, I think, last night or the night before.
Well, when you're asking questions,
and I hadn't
you're
fucking
very
changed it yet.
clear-headed and present in your
Got itchy
ability
knees.
to ask questions and inquire. So how do you do that?
So first of all, I'm worried that my mind easily gets trapped when I step on a word.
Oh no!
And I
You
know
scratched it too hard.
it's unstable.
It's bleeding.
You kind of realize that you don't
Fuck.
really know the definitions of many words you use, and that can be debilitating. So I kind of try to be more carefree about the words I use, because otherwise you get trapped.
You don't want to be obsessional.
Like literally, my mind halfway through the sentence will think, well, what does the word sentence mean?
Right. Well,
And then everything else just explodes.
Yeah.
Your big picture idea explodes, and you lost yourself in the minutia.
Well, neurologically, there's a production center and an editing center, and those can be separately affected by strokes. And so often when people are writing or talking, they try to activate both at the same time. And that's so people will try to write an essay and get every sentence right in the first draft. That's a big mistake. And so then you might say, well, how can you be careful with your words but carefree? And the answer is orient yourself properly, right? Well, in the conversation we're having, you have an orientation structure. You want to be prepared. You want to be attentive. Then you want to have an interesting conversation. And you want to have the kind of interesting conversation that other people want to listen to, that will be good for them in some manner. Okay, so that's a pretty good frame.
Yeah.
And then you kind of
Yeah,
scour your heart. You
outspeeds.
think, is that really what you want? Are you after fame? Are you after notoriety? Are you after money? I'm not saying any of those things
It's
are
probably dead on the
necessarily
next turn
bad,
anyway, so.
but they're not optimal, especially if you're
Fuck.
not willing to admit them.
Oh,
And so they can contaminate you. So you want to be decontaminated.
okay.
So
And
you
then
have the right
paralysis
trip,
saves us?
let's say. And so you have to put yourself, that's a meditative practice, you have to put
It's not
yourself
gonna
in
do
the
a whole
right
lot, but
receptive
that's okay.
position with the right goal in mind. Then you can,
I already have Acrobat, so I don't feel pressure
and
to
I think
like,
you can get better and
catch
better at
this
this.
one.
Then you can trust what's going to happen. You know, so for example, before I came here,
room for a large experience game.
I mean, I presume you have a reason for doing the podcast with me. What's the reason?
I mean, we wanted to talk for a long time,
Yeah.
so the reason has evolved. One of the reasons is I've listened to you for quite a long time, so you've become a one-way friend, and I have many one-way friends. Some of my best friends don't even know I exist. So I'm a big fan of podcasts and audiobooks. Actually, most of my friends are dead.
Yeah, right.
The writers.
The definition of a reader.
Yeah.
I'm with a lot of great dead friends.
So I wanted to meet this one-way friend, I suppose, and have a conversation. And then there's this kind of puzzle that I've been longing to solve. The same reason I went to Ukraine, of asking this question of myself: who am I, and what was this part of the world? What is this thing that happened in the 20th century? That I lost so much of my family there, and I feel so much of my family is defined by that place. Now that place includes the Soviet Union. It includes Russia and Ukraine. It includes Nazi Germany. It includes these big, powerful leaders and huge millions of people that were lost in the beauty, the power of the dream, but were also the torture that's was forced onto them through different governmental institutions. And you are somebody that seemed from some angle to also be drawn to try to understand what was that, and not in some sort of historical sense, but in a deeply psychological human sense. What is that? Will it repeat again? In what way is it repeating again?
And how can we stop it?
And how can we stop it? And so
That's the crucial issue.
I felt I wanted to, from very different backgrounds, pull at the thread of that curiosity. You know, I'm an engineer, you're a psychologist, both lost in that curiosity, and both wear suits, and talk with various levels of eloquence about sort of the shadows that that history cast on us. So that was one, and also the psychology. I wanted to be a psychiatrist for a long time. I was fascinated by the human mind.
Some weird shit.
Until I discovered artificial intelligence, the fact that I could program and make a robot move, and until I
think
discovered
he's-
that magic, I thought I wanted to understand the human mind by being a psychiatrist, by talking to people, by through talk therapy, psychotherapy.
So now you got the best of both worlds
Whoa.
because you get to talk to people and you get to build robots.
Yeah, I mean, but the dream ultimately is the robot. That I felt like by building the thing, you start to try to understand it. And
Yeah,
that's
right.
one way. I mean, we all have different skills and proclivities. So like my particular one
I'm very
is
interested in false
has
swiping
to do
here.
with I learn by building.
Yeah.
I think through a thing by building it. And
Yep.
programming is a wonderful thing because it allows you to like build a little toy example.
Oh, no.
So in the same way you can do a little thought experiment, programming allows you to create a thought experiment in action. It can move, it can live, it can,
Right.
and then you can ask questions of it. So all of those, because of my interest in Freud and Jung, you're also in different ways have delved deeply into
Let's go.
into humanity, the human psyche through the perspective of those psychologists. So for all those
Kiddos
reasons,
crying.
paths across.
I
Yeah,
might
so
need
that
to
well,
go
so that's quite a
handle
frame
him.
for a discussion, right?
Yeah.
You had all sorts of
He
reasons,
was
and then you
asleep
think,
and now he's
well,
not.
are you just letting the conversation go where it will? It's like, well, not exactly. You spent all this time. It's not like this came about by accident. This conversation, you spent all this time framing it, and so all of that provides the implicit substructure for the play
Okay,
in the
I have to
conversation.
go
And
check for
if
him.
you have that implicit, here's another way. This is very much worth knowing: is if you get the implicit structure of perception right, everything becomes a game. And not only that, a game you want to play, and maybe in the final analysis, a game you'd want to play forever. So, that's obviously a distant beckoning ideal, but we know games need rules, or there's no play.
Is there advice you can give now that we know the frame to give to me, Lex, about how to do this podcast better, how to think about this world, how to be a good engineer, how to be a good human being?
Never mind, Dave.
What
wants
you
to
know
check
about me.
on
Take
him.
your preoccupation with stuff.
Tumble let her do that.
It's a serious business.
Um,
Right? And that's part of that, to circle back to the beginning, let's say, that's that willingness to gaze into the abyss, which is obviously what you were doing when you went to Ukraine. It's like, it's gazing into the abyss that makes you better. The thing is, and this is maybe where Nietzsche's idea is not as differentiated as it became. Sometimes your
Fucking
gaze can
perfect.
be forcefully directed towards the abyss, and then you're traumatized. If it's involuntary and accidental, it can kill you.
is he okay?
The more it's voluntary, the more transformative it is. And that's part of that idea about facing death and hell. It's like, can you tolerate death and hell? And the answer is, this terrible answer is, yes, to the degree that you're willing to do it voluntarily. And then you might ask, well, why should I have to subject myself to death and hell? I'm innocent. And then the answer to that is, even the innocent must be voluntarily sacrificed to the highest good.
Yeah?
That's such an interesting distinction. Voluntary suffering.
Voluntary, yeah. Well, that's why the central Christian doctrine is pick up your cross and follow me.
This is like the
And I'm
perfect
speaking
interview
Not in religious terms
setting
saying that.
for
I'm
Jordan
just speaking
Peterson.
as a psychologist.
because-
It's like one of the things we've learned in the last 100 years is voluntary
He's so
exposure to that
fucking
which
dramatic.
freezes and terrifies you
And-
in measured
and Lex
proportions.
Is
He's
okay
true.
with getting a little dramatic. Lex is a
So
little
a
dramatic
form
too.
of, at least in part, involuntary suffering is depression.
So it's just kind of like the perfect.
Do you have advice for people on how to find a way out? You're a man who has
Is that a
suffered in this
gastropherm?
way,
No.
perhaps
fuck.
continue to suffer in this
Rude.
way.
I need
How
that
do you
though.
find a way out?
Request.
The first thing I do as a clinician, if someone comes to me and says they're depressed, is ask myself a question. Well, what does this person mean by that? So I have to find out, like, because maybe they're not depressed, maybe they're hyper anxious, or maybe they're obsessional. Like, there's various forms of powerful negative emotion, so they need to be differentiated. But then the next question you have to ask is, well, are you depressed, or do you have a terrible life, or is it some combination of the two? So if you're depressed, as far as I can tell, you don't have a terrible life. You have friends, you have family, you have an intimate relationship, you have a job or a career, you're about as educated as you should be given your intelligence. Use your time outside of work wisely. You're not beholden to alcohol or other temptations. You're engaged in the community in some fundamental sense, and all that's working. Now, if you have all that and you're feeling really awful, you're either ill or you're depressed. And so then sometimes there's a biochemical route to that, treatment of that. My experience has been as a clinician is if you're depressed, but you have a life and you take an antidepressant, it will probably help you a lot. Now, maybe you're not depressed, exactly. You just have a terrible life. What does that look like? You have no relationship. Your family's a mess. You've got no friends. You've got no plan. You've got no job. You use your time outside of work not only badly, but destructively. You have a drug or alcohol habit or some other vice, pornography addiction. You are completely unengaged in the surrounding community. You have no scaffolding whatsoever to support you in your current mode of being or you move forward. And then, as a therapist, well, you do two things. Well, if it's depression, per se, well, like I said, there's sometimes a biochemical route, a nutritional route. There's ways that can be addressed. It's probably physiological if you're, at least in part, if you're depressed but you have an okay life. Sometimes it's conceptual. You can turn to dreams, sometimes to help people, because dreams contain the seeds of the potential future. And if your person is a real good dreamer and you can analyze dreams, that can be really helpful. But that seems to be only true for more creative people. And for the people who just have a terrible life, it's like, okay, you have a terrible life. Well, let's pick a front. How about you need a friend, like one sort of friend? Do you know how to shake hands and introduce yourself? I'll have the person show me. So let's do it.
God damn.
So, yes, hi, I'm Jordan. And people don't know how to do that. And then they can't even get the ball rolling.
For the listener, Jordan just gave me a firm handshake.
Yeah, as opposed to a dead fish. You know, and there's these elementary social skills that, hypothetically, if you were well cared for, you learned when you were like 3. And sometimes people have... I had lots of clients to whom no one ever paid any attention. And they needed like 10,000 hours of attention. And some of that was just listening, because they had 10,000 hours of conversations they never had with anyone. And they were all tangled up in their head. And they had to just... One client in particular, I worked with this person for 15 years. And what she wanted from me was for me just to shut the hell up for 50 minutes. It was very hard for me. And to just tell me what had happened to her. And then what happened at the end of the conversation, then I could discuss a bit with her. And then as we progressed through the years, the amount of time that we spent in discussion increased in proportion in the sessions until by the time we stopped seeing each other, when my clinical practice collapsed, we were talking about 80% of the time. But she had never been attended to properly, ever. And so she was an uncarved block in the Taoist sense, right? She hadn't been subjected to those flaming swords that separated the wheat from the chaff. And so you can do that in therapy. If you're listening and you're depressed, I would say if you can't find a therapist, and that's getting harder and harder because it's actually become illegal to be a therapist now because you have to agree with your clients, which is a terrible thing to do with them. Just like it's terrible just to arbitrarily oppose them. You could do the self-authoring program online because it helps you write an autobiography. And so if you have memories that are more than 18 months old that bother you when you think them up, part of you is locked inside that. An undeveloped part of you is still trapped in that. That's a metaphorical way of thinking about it. That's why it still has emotional significance. So you can write about your past experiences, but I would say wait for at least 18 months if something bad has happened to you, because otherwise you just hurt yourself again by encountering it. You can bring yourself up to date with an autobiography. There's an analysis of faults and virtues, that's the present authoring, and then there's a guided writing exercise that helps you make a future plan. That's young men who do that, they go to college, young men who do that, 90 minutes, just the future authoring, 90 minutes. They're 50% less likely to drop out. That's all it takes.
So sometimes depression is this heavy cloud that makes it hard to even make a single step towards it. Or you said isolate, make a friend.
Oh man, sometimes
the first step is extremely difficult.
Oh my God, sometimes it's way worse than that. Like I had clients who were so depressed they literally couldn't get out of bed. So what's their first step? It's like, can you sit up once today? No. Can you prop yourself up on your elbows once today? Like you scale back the dragon till you find one that's conquerable that moves you forward. There's a rubric for life. Scale back the dragons till you find one conquerable, and it'll give you a little bit of goal, commensurate with the struggle. But the plus side of that, because you think that, God, that's depressing. You mean I have to start by sitting up? Well, you do if you can't sit up. But the plus side of that is it's the Pareto distribution issue, is that aggregates exponentially increase. And failures do too, by the way, but aggregates exponentially increase. So once you start the ball rolling, it can get zipping along pretty good. This person that I talked about was incapable of sitting with me in a cafe when we first met, just talking, even though I was her therapist. But by the end,
what were y'all
she was
even
doing
gonna
stand-up
do?
comedy. So it took
oh my
years.
gosh, you're like
but
a little baby.
Still, most people won't do stand-up comedy. That's quite the bloody achievement. She would read her poetry on stage too.
You're
So for someone who was
tiny.
petrified into paralysis by
You're
social
like
anxiety,
itty bitty.
and who had to start very small, it was a hell of an accomplishment.
Oh, wait, no.
Yeah, it all starts with one step. You have advice for young people in high school? You've given a lot of people look up to you for advice, for strength, for
Thanks.
strength to search for themselves, to find themselves.
Take on some responsibility. Do
No,
something for
okay.
other people. You're doing something for yourself while you're doing that, even if you don't know it, for sure, because you're a community across time. Find something to serve.
somebody to help,
Someone to
problem
help.
to solve.
A job. Find a job. Do your best with the customers. Don't be above your job. You're going to get an entry-level job when you're a kid. Well, what else would you want? You want to be the boss? What do you know? You don't know anything. You could be the boss of your job. If you're working in a grocery store, or you're working in a convenience store, assuming you're not working for terrified tyrants, you can be nice to the customers. You can develop your social skills. You can learn how to handle boss-employee relationship. You can be there 15 minutes early and leave 15 minutes late. Like, you can learn in an entry-level job, man. And I'll tell you, if you take an entry-level job and you learn, and it's a reasonably decent place, you will not be in an entry-level job for long. Because everyone who's competent is desperate for competent people. And if you go and show yourself as competent, there'll be a trial period, but if you go show yourself as competent, all sorts of doors you didn't even know were there will start opening like mad.
Why do you keep
You
using
strive for
bulldogs?
competence, for craftsmanship.
Yeah. For discipline.
He's so
You know,
small.
I
I
mean-
need him.
I said in one of the chapters of my books is focused on putting your house in order. It's like, well, how do you start? Make your bed. It actually took me quite a long time in my life before I made my bed regularly in the morning. Most of my life was in pretty good order, but that was one thing I didn't have in order. My clothes in my closet as well. All that's in
I
order.
still don't.
Not all of it. I'm cleaning out some drawers right now. But
I'm lazy.
look around and see what
It'll
bugs
never
you in your
change.
room. Just look. It's like, okay, I'm in my room. Do I like this room? No, it bugs me. Okay, why? Well, the paint's peeling there, and it's dusty there, and the carpet's dirty, and that corner's kind of ugly, and the light there isn't very good, and my clothes closet's a mess, so I don't even like to open it. Okay, that's a lot of problems. That sucks. That's a lot of opportunity. Pick something and fix it.
Something that bugs you.
Yeah, but not too much. So the rule is, pick something you know would pick a problem. Pick a solution to it that you know would help, that you could do, that you would do. So you have to negotiate with yourself. It's like, well, I won't clean up this room. How do you know? I've been in here for 10 years and I've never cleaned it up. It's like, well, obviously that's too big a dragon for you. Would you clean one drawer? Find out. And so imagine now you want to be happy when you open
Is
that
it gonna
drawer.
make me
You think,
battle
"That's
stuff?"
stupid." It's like, is it? Maybe
It
it's your
is,
sock
isn't it?
drawer, which I cleaned up in the
Isn't
room
it?
the other day, by the way. You're gonna open that every morning. That's like 30 seconds of your life every day. Okay, so that's 3 minutes a week. That's 12 minutes a month. That's 2 hours a year.
Was I not
So
supposed
maybe
to
your
come
life
over
is
here
made
yet?
of,
I
you've got
thought I
16
was.
hours a day. Let's figure this out. 5,
Don't care.
12 in an hour, 12 in an hour, 144 in
Wow.
12 hours. Yeah, let's say 200. 200 5-minute chunks. That's your life.
Ladies and gentlemen, Jordan Peterson did just some math how many 5-minute chunks there are in a day. And
I
I'm
got
pretty
it
sure that's
approximate-
pretty accurate.
It's,
Yeah.
it's approximate.
Oh, I see it
So-
now.
You got 200 5-minute chunks, and they repeat. A lot of them repeat. So if you get every one of those right, they're trivial, right? Who cares? What my sock drawer looks like. It's there. Fair enough, man, but that's your life. The things you repeat every day. The mundane things. Think I could get all those mundane things right. That's the game rules. It's like now all the mundane is in place. Now you can play because all the mundane's in place. And this is actually true. So with children, imagine you want your children to play. Well, play is very fragile neurologically. Any competing motivation or emotion will suppress play. So everything has to be in order. Everything has to be a walled garden before the children will play. That's a good way of thinking about it. So you put everything in order and you think, oh my God, now I'm tyrannized by this order. It's like, no, you aren't. Not if it's voluntary. And then the order is the precondition for the freedom. And so then all of a sudden
the
you get all these things in
fuck am
order.
I
It's like, oh,
listening
it's like,
to?
I've got some room to play here. And then maybe you're not depressed. Now it's often not that simple, It's not that simple. Try putting your room in order, perfect order. That's hard,
I
man.
mean, that's a really powerful way to think about those 5-minute chunks. Just get one of them right in a day.
Yeah,
Let's
well,
get
if you
one
do
of them
that for 200 days, your life is in order. I thought I did that with my clients a lot. So a lot of them would come home from work, the guys, and their wives would meet them at the door, and it'd be a fight right away. And it's a clash there because he comes home and he's tired and hungry. He's worked all day, and he's hoping that, he gets welcomed when he comes back to the home. But then the wife is at home, and she's been with the kids all day, and she's tired and hungry, and she's hoping that when he comes home, he'll show her some appreciation for what's happened today. And then they clash, and then they both have problems to discuss because they've had their troubles during the day. And so then every time they get together, they are not like it's a bit of a fight for 20 minutes, and then the whole evening is screwed. And so then you think, okay, here's the deal. It's knock and the door will open. Okay, you get to pick what happens when you come home, but you have to figure out what it is. So now this is the deal. You treat yourself properly. You imagine coming home, and it goes the way you want and need it to go. Okay, what does that look like? You get to have it, but you have to know what it is. What does it look like? And you think, okay, I want to come home. I want to be happy about coming home. I come home. I open the door. I say, hello, honey, I'm home. My wife says, hi, it's so nice to hear your voice. She comes up. She says, hi, dear. She gives you a hug. She says, how was your day? And you say, well, we'll sit and talk about that. How was your day? Well, we'll sit and talk about that. Do you need something to eat? Probably. Let's go sit and talk about our day. So, that sounds pretty good. Okay, that sounds pretty good. Might not be perfect, but sounds a hell of a lot better than what we're doing now. So how about we'll go talk to your wife. Say, okay, this is what's happening when I come home. I would like it to be better. What would you like to have happen if you could have what you wanted? And so she sits down and she thinks, okay, if he comes home, what do I want to have happen? And then now you got two visions and you say, well, what would you like? And you listen and she says, what would you like? And you tell her, and then you think, okay, now how can we bring these visions together? So not only do we both get what we want, but because we brought them together, we even get more than we want.
Look at Jordan
Well, who
Peterson
wouldn't agree to that unless they were even down?
Healthy relationships.
And that's so exciting. It's not a compromise.
That's so cool.
It's a union of
This
ideals.
is genuinely good advice.
That even makes a better ideal. And then you get to come home. And then there's another rule that goes along with that, which is, please, dear, have the grace to allow me to do this stupidly and badly while I learn at least 20 times. And I'll give you the same leeway. And then we'll practice stupidly for 20 times and we'll talk about it. And then maybe we'll get it right for the next 10,000 times, right? And you can do that with your whole life, and you can do that with your kids, and you can do that with your family. Like, it's not easy, but you can do it. It's a lot easier than the alternative.
Let me ask for some dating advice from Jordan Peterson. How do you find, on that topic, the love of your life?
That's a good question. I was asked that multiple times on my tour, 3 times in a row, in fact, because we asked people to use this Slido gadget.
That's a popular question.
It always came up to the top. And I got asked that 3 times in a row, and I didn't have a good answer. And then I thought, why didn't I have a good answer? I thought, oh, I know why. Because that's a stupid question. So
Dunked
why?
on him.
Why? Because
Fuck that kid.
It's putting the cart before the horse. Here's the right question. How do I make myself into the perfect date? You answer that question, and you will not have any problem answering the previous question. It's like, what do I want in a partner? If I offered everything I could to a partner, who would I be? You work on that. Ask that question. Just ask. Just ask yourself, okay, I have to be the person that women would want.
What am I fighting? Gliscor.
What do they want? Clean. That's not a bad start. Reasonably good physical shape. So healthy. Productive. Generous. Honest. Willing to delay gratification. So you dance with a woman. It's like, what's she doing? What are you two doing? Well, it's a patterned. There's patterns happening around you. That's the music. Patterns of being. That's the music. Now, can you align yourself with the patterns of being gracefully? That's what she's checking out. And then can you do that with
Let's
her?
go.
And then can you do that in a playful and attentive manner? And keep your bloody hands to yourself for at least a minute. And so, can you dance?
What?
In a playful manner. It's like, you can go through this in your imagination. And you'll know. And then you think, well, how far am I from those things? And the answer is usually, man, it's a pretty horrible abyss separating you from that ideal. But the harder you work on offering other people what they need and want, the more people will line up to play with you. So it's the wrong question. It's like, how can I be the best partner possible? And then you think, well, if I do that, people will just take advantage of me. And that's the non-naive objection, right? Because the naive person saying, well, I'll be good and everyone will treat me right. It's like the cynic says, no, I'll be good and someone will take me out. And then you think, well, what do you do about that objection? And the answer is, well, you factor that in. And that's why you're supposed to be, what is it? As soft as a dove and as wise as a serpent. It's like, I know you're full of snakes. I know it. Maybe I know it more than you do. But we'll play anyways. And
Take the risk anyway.
That's right, voluntarily, right? It's like, and what's so cool about that is that even though the person you're dealing with is full of snakes, if you offer your hand in trust and it's real, you will evoke the best in them.
Yeah.
And that's true. Even I've dealt with people who are pretty damn criminal and pretty psychopathic, and sometimes dangerously so. And you tread very lightly when you're dealing with someone like that, especially if they're intoxicated. And even then, your best bet is that
He might not be
alert
lying here.
trust. It's the only
probably
fact,
not
the only
lying
thing
here,
I know
actually.
that. Like I had one client who was a paranoid. He was a paranoid
high.
psychopath. That's a
I
bad
needed to think
combination.
about it for a second.
He was a
My
bad guy,
apologies.
man. He had like 4 restraining orders on him, and restraining orders don't work on the sort of people that you put restraining orders on. And he used to be harassed now and then by, a bureaucrat in a bank with delusions of power. And he would say to them, he used to kind of act this out to me when I was talking to him. He'd say, "I'm going to be your worst nightmare." And he meant it.
Yeah.
And he would do it. He had this obsessional, psychopathic vengeance that was just like right there, paranoid to the hilt. And paranoid people are hyper acute. So they're watching you for any sign of deceit or manipulation, and they're really good at it because like they're 100% that's what paranoia is. It's 100% focus on that. And even under those circumstances, if you step carefully enough, you can avoid the acts. That's a good thing to know if you ever meet someone truly dangerous.
Absolutely, I believe in that being fragile, nevertheless, taking that leap of trust towards another person, even when they're dangerous, especially when they're dangerous. If you care, if there's something there in those hills you want to find, then that's probably the only way you're going to find it, is taking that risk. I have to ask you about Gulag Archipelago by Solzhenitsyn that speak to this very point. There's so many layers to this book, we could talk about it forever. I'm sure in many ways we are talking about it forever. But there is sort of one of the themes captured in a few ways that's
Sylvia?
described in
Pretty
the book is
bulky.
that line between good and evil that runs through every
We
human
can
being.
use,
As he writes,
3 of them.
the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. During the life of any heart, this line keeps changing place. Sometimes it is squeezed one way to exuberant evil, and sometimes it shifts to allow enough space for good to flourish. One and the same human being is, at various ages, under various circumstances, a totally different human being. At times, he is close to being a devil, at times to sainthood. But his name doesn't change, and to that name we ascribe the whole lot, good and evil. What do you think about this line? What do you think about this thing where we talked about if you give somebody a chance, you actually bring out the best in them? What do you think about this other aspect that throughout time, that line shifts inside each person, and you get to define that shift? What do you think about this line? Are we all capable of evil?
Well, the cosmic drama, that's Satan versus Christ. It's like, well, who's that about?
The
It's not
cosmic
about you.
drama.
I'm speaking just as a psychologist or as a literary critic. Those are characters. At least they're that. Well, are they human characters? Well, obviously. Well, are they archetypal human characters? Yes. What does that mean cosmically and ontologically? I don't know. Is the world a story? Maybe.
But the way stories are often told is the characters embody a
Yeah, I know.
Really?
Those are
Okay.
unsophisticated. Not great literature, though. It's very rare in great literature. What you have in great literature generally is the internal drama, right? As the literature becomes more pop, I would say, the characters are more unitary. So there's a real bad guy and he's all bad, and there's a real good guy and he's all good. And that's not as interesting. It's not as
Oh my
sophisticated.
gosh.
When you reach Dostoevsky in heights, in literary representation, or Shakespearean heights, you can identify with the villain. And that's when literature really reaches its pinnacle in some sense.
And also the characters change throughout. They shift
Yeah.
throughout. They're unpredictable throughout. I've taken the speaking of Russian more seriously recently. And I've gotten to talk to translators of Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and Chekhov and those kinds of folks. And you get to... One of the mistakes that translators made with Dostoevsky for the
One
longest
was
time
too early, the
is
other
they
was
would,
too late.
quote-unquote, fix the chaotic mess that is Dostoevsky. Because there was a sense like he was too rushed in his writing. It seemed like there was tangents that had nothing to do with anything. The characters were unpredictable and not inconsistent. There's parts of phrases that seem to be incomplete,
Let's
that
go.
kind of stuff. And what they realized that's actually
What is
crafted
it?
that way.
Oh, it's medical?
Not,
Yes.
it's like editing James Joyce, like Finnegan's Wake or something, because it doesn't make any sense. They realized that is the magic
My
of it.
poor
That
boy.
captures
I
the
actually need
humanity
to
of these
keep the
characters, that
software
they are
request.
unpredictable. They change throughout time. There's a bunch of contradictions. On which point I gotta ask, is there a case to be made that Brothers Karamazov is the greatest book ever written?
Yeah, there's a case to be made for that. I don't know. Is it better than Crime and Punishment?
Yes, yeah.
You think so? Why do you? I'm not arguing with you. Why do you think that?
Well, it's every person. Some of my best friends are inside
Sorry.
that book.
Yeah, it's an amazing book.
I mean,
There's
they
no
c-
doubt about it.
I think some books are defined by your personal relationship with them, and that one was definitive. And I almost graduated to that one because for the longest time, The Idiot was my favorite book of all. because I identified with the ideas represented by Prince Mishkin. I also identified
That's interesting.
to Prince Mishkin as a human being.
The holy fool.
The fool, yeah, because the world kind of my whole life still kind of saw me in my perception, in my narrow perception, as kind of the fool, and I, different from the interpretation that a lot of people take of this book, I see him as a kind of hero, to be
Definitely.
to be a naive, quote unquote fool, but really just a naive optimist, and naive in the best possible way. I do believe that
That's childlike.
yeah, childlike is a better. So naive is usually seen as
That's childish, naive.
yeah, but childlike is
That's why no one enters the kingdom of heaven unless they become like a child. That's Prince Mishkin. Dostoevsky knew that. So that's why you like The Idiot. That's so interesting. See, I think I like Crime and Punishment because, you identified with Mishkin. I think I identified more with Raskolnikov because I was tempted by Luciferian intellect, in the manner that, in a manner very similar to the manner he was tempted.
Oh,
But I mean,
stop it.
I think you can make a case that The Brothers
You're
Karamazov
so
is
dramatic.
Dostoevsky's crowning achievement.
well.
And that's something, man. He ruined literature for me because everything else just felt insipid afterwards. Not everything. Not everything. I found some books that, in my experience, hit that pinnacle. The Master and Margarita. That's a deadly book. I read that I think 4 times, and it's unbelievably
If
deep.
that doesn't work, I'm gonna be
There's a
mad.
Nikos Kazantzakis, Greek writer.
Let's go.
Some of his books his writing is amazing as well.
Did you ever connect with the literary existentialist Camus, or
Let's
people like Hermann
go.
Hesse, or even Kafka?
Yeah.
Did you ever connect
Oh
with
my
those?
To the same degree?
gosh.
Yeah, to the same.
Enough to be an influence.
Oh my
You have to be
goodness. Oh
deaf
my
in some
days.
fundamental sense not to encounter
Oh my
a great
goodness.
dead friend and
They
fail to
call
learn. And I mean, I tried to separate the wheat from the chaff when I read. And I
But
read all the great
that's-
clinicians.
that's not
all of
shiny.
them. Perhaps not.
There's no way.
Those who are foremost in the pantheon. And I tried to pull out what I could, and that was a lot. I learned a lot from Freud. I learned a lot from Rogers. And I learned a lot from Dostoevsky and Nietzsche. I'm going to do a course on Dostoevsky and Nietzsche for this Peterson Academy. This is coming up in January.
Oh, that would be them
I'm really
together.
looking forward to it.
You're weaving.
Let's go.
I hadn't thought about doing them together.
Oh.
That'd be fun. That's a good idea.
Well,
That'd be a good idea.
there's an
Steal
interesting.
that idea.
What's over here?
You often weave them together
Yeah.
really
We're just doing a
masterfully
quick.
because
We're just doing a quick
there
peek
is
about.
religious.
We're not
in the
taking too
broad
many
sense of that
detours.
word,
Just quick
themes
detours.
throughout the writing of both.
Yeah, well, there's
And since we
uncanny
gotta go up
parallelisms
anyway,
in
we
their
might as well
writing
go
and
up now.
lives.
You know?
So, and
On the
Dostoevsky's
interesting
deeper
side
than
of the
Nietzsche,
mountain.
but that's because he was a writer of fiction.
Whoa.
Nietzsche is
Not what I
almost a
wanted to
character
do.
in a Dostoevsky.
He is definitely that. He is definitely that. Yes. And,
Uh,
and apparently Nietzsche knew more about Dostoevsky than people had thought. There's been some recent scholarship on that grounds. Dostoevsky didn't know anything about Nietzsche, as far as I know. Could be wrong about that. But the thing that Dostoevsky had over Nietzsche is Nietzsche had to make things propositional in some real sense because he was a philosopher. And it's hard to propositionalize things that are outside your ken, but you can characterize them. And so in The Brothers Karamazov, Ivan is a more developed character than Alyosha in the explicit sense. He can make better arguments. But Alyosha wins, like Mishkin, because he's the better man. And Dostoevsky can show that in the actions. Right? He can't render it entirely propositional, but that's probably because what's good can't be rendered entirely propositional. And so Dostoevsky had that edge over Nietzsche. Said, well, Ivan is this brilliant rationalist, atheist, materialist, and puts forward an argument on that front
Oh, I'm
that's still
surprised I didn't get
unparalleled
a
as far as I'm
notification
concerned.
that I kind of
And overwhelms Alyosha, who cannot respond, but Alyosha is still the better man. So, which is very interesting, that
What the funny thing about those two characters is you, Jordan Peterson, seem to be somebody that at least in part embodies both, because you are one of the intellectuals of our time, rigorous in thought, but also are able to have that kind of, what would you describe? If you remove the religiosity of Alyosha, there's what's a good word? Love towards the world.
spirit of encouragement.
Yes.
Hmm.
Which
Yeah,
one?
well, it's one of the things I did learn, perhaps, from looking into the abyss to the degree that I have had to, or was willing to, was that at some level you have to make a fundamental statement of faith. When God creates the world, after each day he says he saw that it was good. I think, well, is it good? It's like, well, there's a tough question. Do you want to bring a child into a world such as this? Which is a fundamental question of whether or not it's good. It's an act of faith to declare that it's good, because the evidence is ambivalent.
Yeah.
And so then you think, okay, well, am I going to act as if it's good? And what would happen if I did? And maybe the answer to that is, I think this is the answer. The more you act out the proposition that it's good.
Are we gonna get two cries?
Gets-
Two crying from Jordan
So that's
Peterson?
Dostoevsky said. This is something else. Every man is not only responsible for everything he does, but for everything everyone else does. It's like, what, is that profound, or are you just insane? Then you think, is what you receive back proportionate to what you deliver? And the answer to
What
that
is
might
it?
be yes.
Nugget.
That's a terrifying
Oh, I
idea.
definitely want that.
And it certainly, you can see that it's true in some sense, because people certainly
I was gonna
respond
dodge.
to you
No worries.
in kind with how you treat them.
I was
That's certainly
definitely
the
gonna.
case.
I mean, it's
Is it
terrifying
really
and it's
ground
exciting.
That's
Yeah,
pretty
right.
insane.
Well, that's an adventure, isn't
Let's
it?
see if we can hit
You,
rock slide.
yeah,
Let's go.
you create the world by
So let's
the
see
way
if we
you
can hit
live
it
it.
twice.
The world you experience
Whoa.
is defined by the way you live that world. And that's really interesting. And then taken as a collective, we create the world
Ooh.
together in that way.
Yeah.
What do you
And
think
through
is the meaning of it
obscuring.
all? What's the meaning of life?
Let's
Jordan Peterson?
go.
We've defined it many times throughout this conversation.
It's the adventure along the route, man. And I would say, where's that adventure to be found? In faith?
The adventure
What's the
along
faith?
route, man.
The highest value is love, and truth is its handmaiden. That's a statement of faith, right? Because you can't tell. You have to act it out to see if it's true.
Okay.
And so you can't even find out without, and that's so peculiar. You have to make the commitment a priori.
Yeah.
It's like a marriage. It's the same thing. It's like, well, is this the person for me? Oh, that's the wrong question. How do I find out if this is the person for me? By binding myself to them. Well, maybe the same thing's true of life, right? You bind yourself to it. And the
Oops,
tighter you
that was
bind
wrong
yourself to
button.
it, the more you find out what it is. And that's like a radical embrace. And it's a really radical embrace. That's the crucifix symbol. And more than that, because like I said, the full
Let's
passion
go.
story isn't death. It isn't even unjust death. It isn't even unjust death and the crucifixion of the innocent, which is really getting pretty bad. It's unjust, torturous, innocent death attendant upon betrayal and tyranny, followed by hell. Well, that's a hell of a thing to radically embrace. It's like, bring it on.
That's fine.
I think a lot of people put
We
truth as the
actually
highest
don't care.
ideal and think they can get to that ideal while living in a place of cynicism and ultimately escape from life and hiding from life, afraid of life. And it's beautifully put that love is the highest ideal to reach for, and truth is...
It's handmaiden. I thought about that for a long time, right? This hierarchy of ideal. And the thing about truth, that bitter truth, let's say, that cynical truth, is it can break the shackles of naivety. And
Just turn
actually,
a little bit.
a burnt cynicism is a moral improvement over a blind naivety. Even though one is in some ways positive, but only because it's protected, and the other is bitter and dark. It's still better. But you're not done at that point. You're just barely started. It's like, you're cynical? You're not cynical enough. It's like, how cynical are you? Are you, I'm an Auschwitz prison guard level of cynical? Because you have to go down pretty deep into the weeds before you find that part of you. But you can find it if you want. And then you think, well, I want to stop this. Well, that was the question you posed. In some sense, you're obsessed with, say, what happened on these mass scale catastrophes in the communist countries. It's like, well, millions of people participated. So you could have, and maybe you would have enjoyed it. So what part of that is you? And you can find it if you want.
Yeah, it's all there. The prisoner, the interrogator, the...
Judas, Pontius Pilate.
all of it.
All of it,
And it's
yeah.
all of it is inside us.
Yeah.
And you just have to look. And once you do, maybe eventually you can find the love. Jordan, you're an incredible human being. I'm deeply honored you would talk to me. Thank you for being a truth seeker in this world, and thank you for the love.
Hey, thanks for the invitation, man.
Chunky salt.
Thanks for
I
listening
think
to
I
this
need that
conversation with
later.
Jordan Peterson. To support this podcast, please check out our sponsors in the description. And now,
I just
I'm gonna leave you
just
with some words
fucking
from
hate
Friedrich
how
Nietzsche. You must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star. Thank you for listening.
I just
and
hate
hope
how
to see you
dramatic he
next
is.
time.
Jordan Peterson is like the most dramatic individual. Sure. Fuck it. Oh, wait, no, I'm gonna end stream here in a minute. And go to bed. I'm very tired. 2.5 hours of streaming. Honestly, I wish I did more. I just have things I have to do. But tomorrow I'll stream a lot because I'll be home all day. So I should have time. Is that everything? I think so, basically. I saw something moving over there. Oh, it's a pseudo Wudo. What's up, bro? Thanks, dude. Oh. He got away. Let's go. Man, those like shooting star effects fucking go. I wonder if it's because of how far away I was. Am I missing anything? I don't think so. Woo! I really wanted to get to the top of that. I really want to get more done tonight, but I really need to go to bed. It is 11 o'clock. Just a berry, I don't care. I hate how many scatterbangs I have. I don't use them. I probably should. Because some mons get like really annoying. I just haven't used one ever, so I don't know how they work, and I'm afraid that if I just like throw one in a moment of panic because I really need something to like get some mon to fuck off, that like it's not going to work, and I'll have to put like all of my hope into it for no reason. Oh, actually, wait. Yeah. This is what I wanted. Thank you. Oh, wait, where are we supposed to go? We're supposed to go that way. Damn, dude, chill. Not very chill zombie mode stream vibes of you, brave. Watch out! Fuck. I already have one. I don't need any more. I need to get at least one more thing done tonight. No, I'm gonna save here and we'll quit. Alright. Okay, everybody. Good night.